It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon at Victory Motors, the kind of day where the sun barely peeked through the clouds, casting an almost melancholic glow over the showroom floor. Jerry Matthews, the dealership's manager, stared blankly at the empty lot outside. Business had been slow for weeks now, and every passing minute seemed to sink his spirits lower. The dealership was struggling, the cars weren't selling, and his team was barely motivated to keep pushing. For the last few months, Jerry had been fighting to keep the business afloat. He wasn't just managing the sales. He was dealing with angry clients, the pressures from corporate, and even worse, his own doubts. How much longer could he hold on? Would this be the end of his career in the auto industry? He sighed and rubbed his face, trying to shake off the frustration. The sound of a car pulling up snapped him out of his thoughts. Jerry glanced out the window, expecting to see the usual customers, some middle-aged man in a suit, maybe a family looking for an SUV. But instead, he saw a nondescript black sedan roll into the lot. "Great, another tire kicker," Jerry muttered under his breath. He could already tell this wouldn't be the kind of sale he was hoping for. With a lackluster step, he made his way toward the door, planning to greet the new customer with his usual half-hearted enthusiasm. It was going to be another typical day, he thought. As Jerry reached the entrance, he saw the man stepping out of the sedan. His first impression? Nothing special. The guy was tall, dressed in a hoodie and baseball cap, looking like someone who might be trying to lay low. Jerry almost didn't give him a second thought. He had seen countless customers like this over the years. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Victory Motors. Can I help you with something?" Jerry said, forcing a smile onto his face. The man looked up, giving Jerry a polite nod, though his expression seemed calm, almost indifferent. "Yeah, I'm just looking around. Saw your ad for some good deals." Jerry didn't recognize him. Of course, he didn't recognize most people. He was too busy running the dealership, trying to get cars sold, and keeping the lights on. Still, there was something about this man that Jerry couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, or the calmness in his voice, but he shrugged it off. After all, Jerry had more pressing things on his mind. "Sure thing, feel free to take a look. Let me know if you need anything," Jerry said, already half-turned, ready to retreat into the safety of his office. But then, the man spoke again. "I'm actually interested in a new ride. Something sporty, a little more luxury." Now, that caught Jerry's attention. "Luxury? Huh? Well, we've got a few models that might work for you. Let me show you around." The man followed Jerry as he walked through the showroom floor, pointing out a few vehicles, most of which had been gathering dust for weeks. Jerry rambled on about specs, prices, and features, but his mind wasn't fully in it. He wasn't feeling optimistic. A few months ago, that kind of client would have had him buzzing with excitement, but today, it felt like another wasted opportunity. "Let me show you the BMW M5. It's one of our higher-end models. You're gonna love the handling on it," Jerry continued, his tone more mechanical than enthusiastic. The man seemed genuinely interested, but still, there was something about the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. It didn't add up. Jerry couldn't quite put his finger on it, but then again, he hadn't exactly had the time to care about anything outside of keeping the dealership from going under. As they moved through the showroom, Jerry continued his sales pitch. But, as he glanced back at his client, he noticed the man wasn't really paying attention to the cars as much as he was the layout of the place. It was subtle, but Jerry couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just any customer. "Everything okay, sir?" Jerry asked, trying to break the silence. The man, who had been quietly inspecting the showroom, finally turned his gaze toward Jerry and nodded. "Yeah, I'm good. Just trying to picture myself in one of these cars." Jerry gave a nod, but in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but feel that there was something a little off. This was just another customer, right? But why did it feel like he was being watched? Just as he was about to offer a test drive, the front door of the dealership swung open, and in walked the head of the dealership's corporate office, Lisa Hawkins, her heels clicking loudly on the tile floor. "Jerry," she greeted him briskly, not noticing the man standing beside him. "We need to talk about the quarterly report. Things aren't looking good." Jerry's stomach churned. "Not now. Not today." "Sure, Lisa. Just give me a sec," he muttered. Lisa shot a glance at the man beside Jerry, but didn't pay much attention. Jerry felt a twinge of irritation. The last thing he needed was to be interrupted by corporate. But then, something unexpected happened. As Lisa made her way toward Jerry, her gaze landed on the man standing there, and she froze. Her eyes widened for a split second, before she quickly composed herself and took a few steps toward him. "Mr. Curry," she said, her voice suddenly smooth and respectful. "It's great to see you." Jerry's eyebrows furrowed. Mr. Curry? Who was this guy? Why did Lisa suddenly recognize him? The man, who was still wearing his hoodie and cap, gave a small smile. "Hi, Lisa. It's been a while." Lisa looked at Jerry, her face betraying a mixture of confusion and realization. "Jerry," she said, her voice tight, "this is Mr. Steph Curry." Jerry's heart skipped a beat. Steph Curry? As in, the NBA superstar? He was staring at one of the most famous athletes in the world, and he had just been treating him like an average customer. But it didn't end there. Lisa continued, her voice now tinged with something Jerry couldn't quite place. "Mr. Curry is the new owner of Victory Motors." A wave of realization hit Jerry like a ton of bricks. This was not just any ordinary customer. He had just kicked out the new owner of the dealership without even realizing it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jerry Matthews wasn't the kind of man who dealt with a lot of personal reflection. He prided himself on being straightforward, focused on the task at hand, and above all, keeping things simple. But as he stood there, awkwardly facing Steph Curry, yes, that's Steph Curry, he found himself suddenly questioning everything he thought he knew about his life and career. It wasn't the first time Jerry had encountered celebrities or big shots in the business world. He'd seen his fair share of high-rolling customers, and he'd managed to handle himself well under pressure. But this was different. Steph Curry wasn't just a regular wealthy customer. He was a global icon, someone Jerry had watched dominate the NBA for years. And now, here he was, standing in front of him, and Jerry had just made the most awkward first impression possible. "Look, I didn't know," Jerry began, trying to smooth things over, his palms suddenly sweaty. He felt his chest tighten. "I swear, I didn't recognize you. I mean, you look familiar, but—" Steph simply smiled, the kind of warm smile that made people feel like they were the only person in the room. He wasn't angry, but Jerry couldn't tell if that was a good thing or a bad thing. "No worries, man. I'm not exactly wearing a jersey right now," Steph said with a chuckle, gesturing toward his plain hoodie and cap. Lisa, the corporate head, had already excused herself to make a phone call. But Jerry was still standing there, unsure of how to navigate the situation. He tried to remain calm and professional, but his mind was racing. "Steph Curry is the new owner of this dealership. How could I have missed that?" Jerry wasn't exactly a fan of sports, but even he couldn't avoid hearing about the NBA's biggest stars. Curry's name was synonymous with basketball greatness. It was hard to ignore the countless records he had broken, the championships he had won. Yet, somehow, he had missed the memo that the famous athlete had just purchased the dealership. Jerry had been managing Victory Motors for years, long before the rumors started swirling about a potential acquisition. In his mind, the idea that someone with such fame and fortune would want to invest in a struggling car dealership seemed far-fetched. But there it was, staring him in the face. "So, what brings you to Victory Motors?" Jerry asked, his voice a bit shaky. "Are you looking for a car, or—" Steph chuckled again, a sound that was as effortless as a jump shot. "Well, I actually came here to check things out. You know, see how things are running before I start making any big decisions." Jerry nodded, though he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his stomach. Start making decisions? Jerry had been making decisions for years, but now it seemed like those decisions were about to be taken out of his hands. Steph looked around the dealership, his eyes scanning the cars on the lot. Jerry couldn't help but notice how differently Steph viewed the place. It wasn't just a showroom to him. It was an investment, an opportunity for something new. The same way Jerry had once looked at his own ambitions when he first started out, filled with hope and potential. "I see you've got some good cars here," Steph said, walking toward a sleek sports car. "But I think there's a lot of room for improvement." Jerry's heart sank. Room for improvement? This was his life's work. He had poured everything into Victory Motors, trying to make it a successful business. And now, here was this basketball player, this billionaire, telling him the place needed work. Well, yeah, Jerry replied, trying to keep the conversation light. It's been a bit tough lately. You know, with the economy and all that, we've been doing our best to stay afloat. Steph nodded, his expression unreadable. I get it, but I'm here because I think there's a lot of potential in this place. More than you might realize. It just needs a little reimagining, you know? Jerry was silent for a moment, still processing the reality of the situation. The dealership he had worked so hard to build was now under new ownership, and it seemed like Steph wasn't just here to be a figurehead. He was going to take charge, make changes, and potentially disrupt everything Jerry had worked for. What kind of changes are we talking about? Jerry finally asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. He wasn't sure whether he should be bracing himself for a total overhaul or whether there was still a place for him in Steph's vision. Steph leaned back against one of the cars, his posture casual but his tone serious. Well, for starters, we need to shift the focus. This place has great cars, but it's not just about selling vehicles. It's about creating a culture, a community. You need to build relationships with customers, not just push cars. And from what I can tell, that's not happening right now. Jerry's mind whirred. He had heard that feedback before, certainly from corporate, but hearing it from someone like Steph, someone who was successful beyond measure, felt different. He couldn't deny that the dealership had been in a rut. His sales team had lost their spark, and the once bustling showroom was now eerily quiet. I think we need to rethink how we operate, Steph continued. The way you guys sell isn't working. We need to make it a place where people want to come, not just to buy, but to experience. Jerry was torn. On the one hand, he knew Steph was right. But on the other hand, what did this mean for him? Jerry had been the manager for years, but if Steph was going to start changing things up, where did that leave Jerry? Look, Jerry, Steph said, as if reading his mind, I'm not here to make your life harder. I know this place means a lot to you, but I want to see it succeed. And I think you're the right person to help make that happen. But it's going to require some big changes, and I need someone who's ready to roll with it. Jerry swallowed, the weight of the situation settling heavily in his chest. It was clear that the game had changed. Victory Motors wasn't just his anymore. It was now in the hands of someone who could completely reshape everything Jerry had known. But despite the anxiety gnawing at him, Jerry couldn't ignore the faint glimmer of hope in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, this was the challenge he needed. Maybe this was his chance to prove that he could adapt, to show that he wasn't stuck in his old ways. He nodded slowly, his voice firmer now. All right, Steph, let's make it work. And with that, the partnership, however unlikely, began. It didn't take long for Jerry Matthews to realize that his world was no longer just about managing a car dealership. It was about navigating uncharted waters, the very foundation of everything he knew. The way he ran the business, his relationships with his employees, his connection to his customers, was about to shift. Over the next few days, Jerry tried his best to adjust to his new role under Steph Curry's ownership. On the surface, it wasn't much different. He still ran the day-to-day operations. But Steph's vision for Victory Motors had begun to take shape, and with it came a series of challenges Jerry hadn't expected. The first change came in the form of a team meeting, which Steph had insisted on hosting. Jerry had hoped it would be an opportunity to ease into the transition, but it quickly became apparent that Steph had bigger plans. As Jerry stood at the back of the room, he watched the sales team, who had once been close-knit but now seemed scattered and uncertain, listen intently as Steph laid out his strategy. We're not just selling cars here, Steph said, his voice carrying easily across the room. We're building a brand. We're going to make Victory Motors a place people come to for more than just a car. We want them to feel like family. Jerry could see the excitement in the eyes of some of his salespeople, but there was also a noticeable tension in the air. Some of the older members of the team, who had been working at Victory Motors for years, exchanged wary glances. They'd been used to Jerry's steady approach, predictable, straightforward, and now they were being asked to embrace something new, something uncertain. It wasn't long before Jerry noticed how the once friendly dynamic between the employees started to fray. Some were eager to buy into Steph's vision, seeing it as an opportunity to revive the dealership's fortunes. Others, like Mark, the senior sales rep, were more skeptical. Mark had been with Victory Motors for over a decade, and he wasn't impressed by the sudden change in leadership. "This is a mistake," Mark muttered to Jerry one afternoon as they were walking past the showroom. "We've been doing just fine without all this fluff. Now this guy comes in with his big ideas and thinks we can just turn everything around overnight. It's not gonna happen." Jerry tried to brush it off. He understood where Mark was coming from. Change was hard, especially when it felt like everything you knew was being turned upside down. But Steph wasn't just talking about small tweaks. He was talking about a complete overhaul, rebranding, new marketing strategies, and a shift in the way they interacted with customers. The next major change came when Steph decided to introduce a new customer loyalty program. Jerry's team had always used traditional methods to engage with clients: follow-up calls, occasional promotions, and good old-fashioned word of mouth. But Steph's plan was to take things digital. They were going to launch a sleek mobile app that allowed customers to schedule service appointments, track their purchases, and receive personalized offers. While Jerry saw the potential in the idea, he also saw how much work it would take to implement. His team wasn't exactly tech-savvy, and there was an underlying fear that they wouldn't be able to handle the shift. "Do we really need an app?" Jerry asked Steph one afternoon, after the meeting in which the new strategy was revealed. "Our clients are used to the old ways. What if we lose them by moving too fast?" Steph looked at him, his expression calm but determined. "Jerry, I get it. You've built this place on trust, and that's why I wanted you here. But trust can evolve. This isn't about forgetting the past. It's about staying relevant and building for the future. If we don't adapt, we risk losing everything." The word stung more than Jerry cared to admit. He was stuck in the middle, caught between the tried-and-true methods he had relied on for so many years and the fear of alienating his customers with a new, unfamiliar system. But more than anything, Jerry knew deep down that if Victory Motors was going to survive, they needed to change. The world had changed, and so had the way people shopped for cars. Still, the pressure mounted. As Jerry tried to implement Steph's vision, the cracks in the team's morale deepened. Mark and a few other employees made their discontent known. They didn't want to be forced into a new way of doing things. They were used to a system that worked for them, and this new way felt foreign and uncomfortable. "I can't keep up with this digital nonsense," Mark complained one morning as he stood beside Jerry at the coffee machine. "I've been selling cars the same way for years. I don't need an app to make a sale. I know my customers. I know what they want." Jerry could feel the frustration building in his chest. Mark's resistance was a symptom of a much larger issue: the dealership's failure to embrace change. Jerry had tried to mediate, to explain why Steph's plans were necessary, but he wasn't sure he could convince everyone. The employees who had stuck around for years were resistant, clinging to the old ways, while the newer recruits were eager for change but didn't yet understand the intricacies of the business. But the conflict didn't end with the team. It extended to Jerry's own thoughts. Each day, he felt a growing sense of unease as he tried to balance the vision Steph had laid out with the reality of what was possible. Jerry had built his career on managing expectations, on making things run smoothly. But now, every decision felt like walking a tightrope. Was this the right direction? Could he really transform Victory Motors into the innovative, community-focused dealership Steph envisioned? Or was he just setting himself up for failure? His inner conflict was becoming harder to ignore. Every conversation with Mark and the other employees left him questioning his role. Was he still the leader of this dealership, or had he become just another cog in the machine, pushed aside by a new owner with big dreams? Then, just when Jerry thought things couldn't get more complicated, he received a call that would change everything. It was late afternoon when Jerry's phone rang. The dealership was quieter than usual, a sure sign that another slow day was winding down. Most of the sales team had left for the day, their spirits low after another round of lackluster sales. Jerry sat behind his desk, his eyes scanning the reports, trying to find some silver lining in the numbers. But it wasn't easy. As the phone buzzed, Jerry looked at the screen. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but something told him it might be important. He hesitated for a moment, his mind still swirling with the mounting tension at the dealership. Then, with a resigned sigh, he picked up. "Hello?" he said, his voice tired. "Mr. Matthews?" The voice on the other end was deep and steady, with an air of authority. "This is Michael Turner. I'm the head of corporate relations at the dealership's parent company." Jerry sat up straight. Corporate relations? He hadn't had much direct contact with anyone from corporate since Steph's acquisition. In fact, the only people from corporate Jerry had interacted with were Lisa and the occasional regional manager. He had assumed corporate was leaving him and Steph to figure things out on their own. "Yes, this is Jerry Matthews," he responded, trying to sound more composed than he felt. "How can I help you, Mr. Turner?" "I'm calling to discuss some concerns we've been hearing from the employees," Michael said, his tone measured but serious. "There's been some feedback regarding the recent changes at the dealership. It's been noted that there are some tensions within your team." Jerry's heart sank. Tensions? He had known things weren't going well, but he hadn't realized the situation had escalated to the point where it was reaching corporate ears. "I see," Jerry said slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm doing everything I can to manage the transition. We've had some resistance from the team, but I'm addressing it." "Well, Jerry, here's the thing," Michael continued, his voice gaining a slight edge. "We've been getting reports that some of the employees feel the transition has been handled poorly. They're concerned about the rapid pace of change. I'm sure you understand how delicate this situation is. We need to make sure that the dealership's morale is intact. If there are problems, we need them resolved quickly." Jerry's mind raced. He knew the resistance from his team was palpable, but he hadn't realized it had become a full-blown issue. And now, it seemed, corporate was starting to take notice. "I'm aware of the challenges, Mr. Turner," Jerry said, his voice more firm than before. "But I've been trying to work with Steph on a plan that benefits the dealership in the long run. I'm confident that these changes are necessary, but I also understand the need to keep the team on board." Michael was quiet for a moment, as if weighing his next words carefully. "Jerry, I'm going to level with you. We've been getting conflicting reports. Some people say you're handling it well, others say there's too much resistance. If things don't improve soon, we may need to reassess the situation." Jerry's chest tightened. He had worked so hard to make Victory Motors succeed, but now he was hearing that his efforts might not be enough. The tension between the changes Steph had introduced and the reluctance from his team was more than he had anticipated. "I'll do whatever it takes to get this sorted out," Jerry said, trying to regain control of the conversation. "But we need to give it time. Change takes time, especially when people are set in their ways." "I understand that, Jerry," Michael replied, his tone softening. "But time is something we may not have. We'll be checking in with you again soon. I suggest you work with Steph to resolve this before things get worse. We need to see improvement." The line went silent for a moment, and Jerry could feel the weight of the conversation sinking in. Corporate's worried. "This isn't just about me anymore. This is about the whole future of the dealership." "Understood," Jerry finally said, though he wasn't sure he truly understood anything. "Good," Michael said, before hanging up. Jerry sat there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to his ear, though there was nothing but silence on the other end. His mind was buzzing, but he couldn't make sense of it all. This was his chance to prove he could adapt, to show that he wasn't stuck in the past. But it felt like every decision he made only pushed him further into a corner. He was snapped out of his thoughts when he heard a voice in the doorway. "Hey, Jerry, you all right?" It was Lisa, the corporate liaison who had been helping with the transition. Her face was soft, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "I just got off the phone with Michael Turner," Jerry said, his voice low. "They're concerned. About the team. About how things are going here." Lisa frowned. "I figured that might be coming soon. Things have been tense. But don't worry, Jerry. You're doing the best you can." Jerry sighed, rubbing his temples. "It doesn't feel like it. It feels like no matter what I do, we're just spinning our wheels. Steph's big ideas are great, but if the team isn't on board, what's the point?" Lisa stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. She gave him a sympathetic look. "You can't please everyone, Jerry, but you can make a difference. Focus on the people who are still on your side. Build from there." Jerry nodded slowly, but the weight of the situation didn't let up. Steph's vision was clear, but the path to getting there was anything but easy. He had to find a way to bridge the gap between the old ways and the new. But with corporate breathing down his neck and his own team in disarray, he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep everything from falling apart. As the sun set outside the dealership, Jerry sat back in his chair, staring out the window. The future of Victory Motors and his own career was in jeopardy, and the clock was ticking. The following morning, Jerry arrived at the dealership earlier than usual. The events of the previous day had left him with little sleep, his mind too preoccupied with the looming pressure to rest. He had already called a meeting with Steph to discuss the issues that had come up with corporate and the concerns from the sales team. He needed to find a way to bridge the gap between the old and the new, and he knew Steph needed to be part of the solution. As Jerry entered the dealership, the usual buzz of activity wasn't there. A few employees trickled in, but the energy felt different. It wasn't the usual morning routine. The team had been unsettled by the changes, and it was clear that there was a sense of unease in the air. Jerry glanced over at Mark, who was speaking to a couple of the younger salespeople in hushed tones. He could tell from the body language that whatever conversation they were having, it wasn't about how excited they were for the future of the dealership. Before Jerry could walk over to address the team, the door opened, and in walked none other than Steph Curry. He was dressed casually, his signature sneakers, and a hoodie that looked more like the attire of a regular guy than a wealthy entrepreneur. His presence immediately commanded attention, but today, there was something different about him. His usual calm demeanor was replaced with a sense of urgency. He had something important to say. "Jerry," Steph greeted him with a tight smile, but Jerry could sense that something was off. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course, Steph," Jerry replied, his voice tentative. "I was just about to talk to you about everything that's been going on. I think we need to address a few things before it gets worse." Steph nodded and motioned toward his office. "Let's talk in private." As they walked through the showroom, Jerry couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere seemed to shift in the presence of the new owner. Employees straightened up when they saw him, offering polite smiles, but it was clear that most of them were on edge. Jerry felt a twinge of guilt. The transition wasn't supposed to feel this tense. It wasn't supposed to be this hard. Once in Steph's office, Jerry sat down across from him, waiting for Steph to speak first. There was a moment of silence before Steph leaned forward, his eyes focused on Jerry. "I just got off the phone with some of the investors," Steph began, his tone a little more serious than Jerry was used to. "They're worried. They don't see the progress they were hoping for. And I get it, things take time. But corporate's starting to make it clear that we need results sooner rather than later." Jerry swallowed hard, the weight of Steph's words sinking in. Results. Now, it was all coming to a head faster than he'd anticipated. "I understand," Jerry replied, his voice steady, "but we've been pushing the new initiatives. It's just that there's resistance from some of the team, and honestly, I'm struggling to manage it. The loyalty program, the digital tools, these things take time to implement, and it's not just about the systems. It's about changing mindsets." Steph rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Yeah, I know. But that's the thing, Jerry. The mindset needs to change. I want this dealership to be more than just a place where people buy cars. I want it to be a hub for the community. We need to stand out. The only way to do that is by creating a culture that's willing to evolve. And if the team isn't on board, we need to address it quickly." Jerry nodded. He'd heard this message before, but it felt more urgent now than ever. Steph wasn't just talking about improving the business. He was talking about transforming it into something bigger, something innovative. And that meant everyone had to buy in, or things would fall apart. "Do you have any ideas on how to get the team on board?" Jerry asked, feeling the pressure mounting. Steph stood up and paced the room. "We need to give them a reason to believe. If we're asking people to take a leap of faith, we have to show them that we're in this together. It can't just be my vision. It has to be their vision too." As Jerry listened, he knew deep down that Steph was right. The team needed to believe in the future of Victory Motors, not just in Steph's dreams for the dealership, but in their own place within it. Without that sense of ownership, the changes would never stick. Just then, the door opened, and a voice interrupted their conversation. "Am I interrupting?" The voice was warm but strong, and Jerry turned to see a man standing in the doorway, someone he didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a suit, and had a confident, almost authoritative presence. Steph's face lit up when he saw the man. "David, what are you doing here?" David smiled, walking into the office and extending his hand to Jerry. "Good to see you, Jerry. I'm David Lawrence. I've been working with Steph on the strategy for the dealership." Jerry shook his hand, trying to mask his confusion. "Nice to meet you, David. I wasn't aware we were bringing someone else on board." Steph chuckled, sensing Jerry's hesitation. "David's going to help with the transition. He's an expert in dealership turnarounds, and he's worked with corporate before. I asked him to come down and give us some guidance. He's been through this kind of thing before, and I think he'll have some valuable insight." Jerry forced a smile, trying to mask the apprehension creeping up his spine. Another person? Another layer of oversight? He wasn't sure how he felt about this new addition to the team. It felt like more pressure, more eyes on him. "Well, I'm glad to meet you," Jerry said, though his voice lacked the warmth it usually carried. "I think we could use all the help we can get." David smiled. "I'm here to help, Jerry. Don't worry. We'll make this work." Steph looked between the two men, sensing the underlying tension, but choosing to ignore it. "All right, let's get down to business. Jerry, I want you to meet with David after this, and let's start formulating a concrete plan. We need to figure out how to motivate the team and push through these changes." Jerry nodded, his mind already whirling. He didn't know how much more pressure he could take. Every time he thought he was gaining ground, it felt like the goalposts kept moving. As the conversation continued, Jerry couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing control. Corporate, Steph, and now David. Everyone seemed to have a vision for what Victory Motors should be. But Jerry was beginning to wonder if anyone remembered the way things had been before, when it was just him and the team, working together to keep the dealership afloat. Steph might be the owner now, but Jerry was starting to feel like he was becoming more of a bystander in his own career. The following days at Victory Motors felt like a blur. The tension continued to build as Jerry found himself caught between Steph's vision for the dealership, corporate demands, and a disgruntled team. The balance he had once prided himself on seemed to be slipping away, and he could feel the weight of the dealership's future pressing down on him. Steph had brought in David Lawrence to help guide the transition, and although Jerry tried to remain optimistic, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. David was sharp, confident, and had an air of authority that suggested he had seen this all before. But Jerry couldn't shake the feeling that David was just another voice in the whirlwind of change, another layer of complexity that threatened to make things even harder. Despite his reservations, Jerry followed Steph's directive and met with David several times. Each meeting left him more uncertain. David had a clear, no-nonsense approach to business that Jerry couldn't argue with. But there was something about it that felt cold. He'd heard the phrase, turnaround expert, 100 times. But now it felt like the dealership was being treated like another case study, another project to be checked off a list. Jerry knew the dealership needed help, but the more he worked with David, the more it felt like they were being pushed in a direction that didn't align with the values he had built over the years. Today, however, was different. Steph had called for a meeting in the showroom, and Jerry had a bad feeling about it. It was the kind of meeting that would be high stakes, where everything was on the line, and Jerry wasn't sure if he could walk away with the outcome he wanted. It felt like the final exam of a class he hadn't studied for. As Jerry walked into the showroom that morning, he found a crowd of employees already gathered, chatting amongst themselves. The mood was tense. Employees had gathered around the coffee station, exchanging nervous glances and whispering in hushed tones. Jerry had seen this kind of atmosphere before, when the ground was about to shift and nobody was sure if they could keep their balance. Steph stood at the front, hands clasped behind his back. He wore his usual calm expression, but today there was an intensity in his eyes. Standing beside him was David, looking every bit the business strategist he was touted to be. They were both waiting for Jerry to take his place at the front, and when he did, the room went quiet. Steph gave Jerry a quick nod before turning to address the group. "I'm glad we could all meet this morning," he began, his voice steady. "I know things have been tough lately. Change is never easy, especially when it feels like things are being forced on you. But that's why we're here, to figure out how to make this transition work for everyone." Jerry looked around the room, his eyes meeting those of his employees. They weren't buying it. He could see the skepticism, the doubt. There were a few familiar faces in the crowd: Mark, the head of sales, Michelle, the service manager, and Lisa, who had been working with Jerry for years. They all wore expressions that said it all. We don't trust this. We don't trust him. Jerry knew it was up to him to change that. Steph cleared his throat, breaking Jerry's thoughts. I've brought in David Lawrence to help us navigate this transition. His experience will be invaluable as we work to shift the dealership toward the future. But we need all of you on board to make this happen. David stepped forward, his tone direct. Let's be clear, he said, his eyes scanning the room. We're not here to take it easy. Victory Motors needs to evolve, or it's going to fall behind. That means all of you will need to adapt. The time for traditional methods is over. We need a more modern, efficient approach to sales, service, and customer engagement. Jerry winced. His stomach churned as David's words hung in the air. It wasn't just the shift in business practices that made Jerry uneasy. It was the lack of empathy in David's approach. He was treating the dealership like a machine that needed to be reprogrammed, rather than a family that had built something from the ground up. We're going to implement new strategies, David continued, his voice unwavering. Digital tools, customer relationship management systems, and a loyalty program that actually works. We're going to increase our online presence and leverage data to improve performance. I'm not here to be nice. I'm here to make sure this dealership is ready to compete in a market that's changing every day. The room was silent. Jerry could feel the collective discomfort of his employees. Some of them shifted in their seats, others simply stared ahead. It was clear that David's blunt approach wasn't resonating with them. They weren't looking for another corporate suit dictating terms from the top down. They needed someone who understood the human element of the business. Jerry realized that he had to step in. He stood up, facing his team, and for the first time in a while, he felt a sense of clarity. Listen, I know this isn't easy, Jerry began, his voice firm yet empathetic. Things are changing, and I can't promise it'll be smooth. But I can promise you this. We're in this together. We've been through tough times before. We've faced obstacles that seemed impossible. But we made it through because we believed in each other. We're a team. He paused, looking around the room. I know some of you are worried about the changes. I get it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We're going to have to work hard. But I need you to trust me. I need you to trust that we can find a way forward that works for all of us. There was a long pause before Mark spoke up. And what if we don't want to change? What if we think this is all going too fast? Jerry turned to Mark, his expression serious but understanding. Mark, I get it. I've heard the concerns, and I'm not blind to the challenges. But think of it this way. If we don't change, we risk losing everything. This isn't about throwing everything out the window. It's about making sure we can keep going. And that means evolving. David looked ready to speak, but Jerry held up a hand, signaling for him to wait. This was Jerry's moment to lead, not just to follow someone else's blueprint. Look, Jerry continued, I know you all might not agree with the speed of change, but I believe we can do this together. But we need your commitment. We need you to be part of the solution, not just bystanders. The room was still for a moment before Jerry heard Michelle's voice. All right, Jerry, we're in. But we need to see that you're with us, really with us. Not just following some corporate agenda. Jerry nodded. I'm with you, and I'll prove it. Steph and David exchanged a glance. There was a slight tension in the air, but Jerry had made his stand. He wasn't just going to roll over for corporate. This was his team, and he wasn't going to lose them without a fight. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act for Jerry. The changes that David had introduced began to take shape. The CRM systems were being installed, the website was getting a redesign, and the loyalty program was starting to gain traction, albeit slowly. But the progress felt like it was happening on a thin thread. Every step forward seemed to be met with pushback, and Jerry could feel the growing strain between the employees and the new direction that had been forced upon them. Steph was hands-off for the most part, but his influence was always there, hovering in the background. He trusted Jerry to handle the day-to-day operations, but Jerry knew Steph expected results fast. Meanwhile, David was practically a ghost in the dealership, swooping in with more systems, more policies, more ways to get things done. Sometimes Jerry felt like he was managing two bosses instead of one, and it was exhausting. Every morning, Jerry walked into the dealership, greeted by the same air of uncertainty. The employees were doing what they had to, but the enthusiasm that once filled the space was gone. There was no light in their eyes, no drive behind their actions. It was as if they were just going through the motions, waiting for the storm to pass. One afternoon, as Jerry walked through the showroom floor, he caught sight of Lisa, the longtime service manager. She was at her desk, her head down as she typed away on her computer. She hadn't seen him approach, so he took the opportunity to step over and speak to her quietly. "Hey, Lisa. How's everything going with the new system?" Lisa didn't immediately look up, but she sighed heavily before answering. "It's fine. I mean, it's a lot to take in. The new program is good in theory, but it's not as user-friendly as they made it sound. A lot of the staff are having trouble keeping up." Jerry nodded, understanding her frustration. "I hear you. It's going to take time, but we have to keep pushing through, right?" She finally looked up at him, her expression worn. "I know, Jerry, but it feels like we're being forced to change without understanding why. We're just doing what we're told. I miss the days when we could just focus on our customers without all this extra stuff." Jerry's heart sank. He had known things weren't going well, but hearing it from someone like Lisa, someone who had been loyal to the dealership for years, hit harder than he had expected. He wanted to reassure her, to promise that everything would work out, but the truth was, he wasn't sure anymore. He wasn't sure that he could turn things around. "We'll figure it out, Lisa," he said softly. "Just hang in there." She gave him a tight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "I hope so, Jerry. I really do." Later that day, Jerry found himself in his office, staring at the mountain of reports David had left on his desk. He tried to make sense of the data, but his mind kept wandering back to the conversation with Lisa. The doubt was creeping in again, that familiar feeling of losing control. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. He looked down to see a message from Steph. "Can you meet with me after hours? We need to talk about the next steps." Jerry stared at the message for a moment before replying, "Sure, I'll be there." He didn't know what to expect from the meeting, but the fact that it was after hours told him that it was important. He needed to get to the bottom of this feeling of instability once and for all. That evening, Jerry walked into the dealership's back office, where Steph and David were already seated, looking over some documents. Steph looked up as Jerry entered, offering him a casual nod. But there was a weight to the room that was impossible to ignore. "Hey, Jerry," Steph said, his voice level but serious. "I think it's time we talk about where we're headed." Jerry nodded, sitting down. "I agree. There's been a lot happening, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page." Steph's eyes met his, and for a moment, Jerry saw a flicker of something more personal than business. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "We've been monitoring the progress," Steph said slowly, "and I'm not seeing the results we expected. Corporate's pushing for faster growth, and David's been working hard to get things moving. But the team, they don't seem to be buying in. We're still facing resistance, Jerry." David, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "We need to make a more aggressive move. These systems are all in place, but they're not being utilized properly. I'm seeing a lot of hesitation, and that's a problem." Jerry felt his chest tighten. This was it, the moment when everything could come crashing down. "I understand that the team isn't fully on board yet," Jerry said carefully, "but pushing harder may just drive them further away. We can't afford to alienate the people who've been with us from the start." Steph's gaze sharpened, and Jerry could see the impatience in his eyes. "I know you're trying to keep things calm, Jerry, but we're at a crossroads. Either we push through with these changes and see results, or we risk losing it all." There it was, the unspoken ultimatum. Jerry could feel the pressure mounting. Corporate was demanding results, Steph was counting on him, and David was pushing for immediate action. But Jerry wasn't sure he could continue to hold everything together. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on his shoulders, and for the first time, he questioned his own place in this transformation. Was he the leader the dealership needed right now? Or was he just trying to preserve the old way of doing things out of fear? "Steph, I want to make this work," Jerry said, his voice thick with emotion. "I really do. But I need you to understand, this team is more than just numbers on a report. They're real people with real concerns. We can't keep ignoring that." There was a long silence before Steph finally spoke. I know, Jerry, and I appreciate your loyalty to the team, but we have to move forward. We can't wait any longer. David stood up, looking at both men with a steely gaze. I think it's clear what needs to be done. We either adapt or fall behind. Jerry looked at David, then at Steph. The future of Victory Motors was on the line, and he had to make a choice. The days following the tense meeting with Steph and David felt like a slow-motion disaster in the making. Jerry's mind raced, torn between his loyalty to the team and the pressure mounting from the corporate side. Every time he stepped into the dealership, the cracks were more visible. Employee morale was at an all-time low, and customers were growing increasingly disillusioned. Jerry could feel the weight of the dealership's future on his shoulders, and it was suffocating. The morning after the meeting, Jerry arrived early to try and clear his head. The showroom was quiet, almost too quiet, and he walked slowly through the rows of shiny cars, trying to muster the strength to face the chaos that was waiting behind the scenes. Lisa, the service manager, was the first to approach him. She had a worried look in her eyes as she walked up to him, clearly hesitant to speak. "Hey, Jerry," she said, her voice soft. "Can we talk for a second?" Jerry stopped and turned to face her, nodding. "Of course, Lisa. What's on your mind?" Lisa glanced over her shoulder as if she were making sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "I just wanted to say, I'm really struggling with all this. The new systems are overwhelming, and I can see the others are too. Some of the employees are talking about leaving. It's just too much." Jerry's heart sank. He had known things were bad, but hearing it from someone as loyal as Lisa hit harder than he expected. "I get it," Jerry said quietly, his voice full of empathy. "But we can't stop now. We have to keep pushing. I know it's hard." Lisa gave him a resigned look. "I don't know, Jerry. I used to believe in what we were doing here. But now, it feels like we're just running a business, not a family. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep going like this." Her words cut deep. Jerry felt a pang of guilt. He had always prided himself on running a family-oriented dealership where everyone had each other's backs. Now, that sense of community was crumbling, and no matter how hard he tried to keep everything together, it was slipping through his fingers. "I understand, Lisa," Jerry said, his voice thick. "I promise I'm doing everything I can to make it better. We'll figure it out, okay?" Lisa gave him a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I hope so, Jerry. I really do." As she walked away, Jerry stood there for a moment, staring at the empty showroom. He had to make a decision. The direction they were heading was unsustainable, and the trust he had with his employees was hanging by a thread. But he couldn't give up on them, not when they had given so much to the dealership over the years. That afternoon, Jerry sat down with David in the dealership's small conference room. The weight of the conversation ahead loomed large. "David, I've been thinking a lot about everything," Jerry said, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "I know we need change, but we're pushing too hard, too fast. It's alienating the team, and I can see the results. Our sales are down, customer satisfaction is slipping, and people are leaving. We're going to lose everything if we don't slow down." David, as always, was unfazed. His eyes were cold and calculating, and he didn't hesitate to respond. "Jerry, I understand your concerns, but the reality is we don't have time to slow down. If we don't adapt quickly, we'll be out of business. The competition is fierce, and we're behind." Jerry leaned forward, trying to keep his emotions in check. "We're not just numbers on a spreadsheet, David. These are real people. You can't force change on them and expect everything to just fall into place. It's not going to work like that." David stared at him for a moment, then sighed. "I understand that you have loyalty to your team, Jerry, but you need to understand something. Loyalty doesn't pay the bills. If we don't move faster, if we don't implement these systems now, we're not going to survive." Jerry clenched his jaw, his frustration rising. "I'm not saying we don't need to change. I'm saying we need to do it in a way that respects the people who've been here through thick and thin. You can't just bulldoze your way through this." David crossed his arms, clearly irritated. "You're being emotional about this, Jerry. We don't have the luxury of time. Either you get on board with the plan, or we'll have to move forward without you." The ultimatum hung in the air like a thick fog. Jerry felt the pressure tightening around him, suffocating him. He was standing at a crossroads. One path led to a future with corporate control, where the employees were seen as expendable, and the other path led to a fractured dealership, where trust and loyalty were still the foundation. But which path could he afford to take? Jerry took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. He knew he couldn't let this go on any longer. He had to make a stand. "David, I'm not giving up on my people," Jerry said firmly, locking eyes with him. "I don't care what it costs. We need to find a way to make this work without losing what makes this place special." David's expression darkened, and for a brief moment, Jerry saw something cold in his eyes. "I think you're making a mistake, Jerry. This isn't personal. It's business." Jerry stood up, his decision made. "Maybe it's time we start talking about what's best for the business in a different way." He turned and walked out of the room, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. He knew that by going against David, he was risking everything: the dealership, his career, and even the future of the entire team. But he couldn't stand by and let everything he had worked for crumble, not without a fight. That evening, Jerry called a meeting with his team. The air was thick with uncertainty, but Jerry had to speak the truth. He owed them that much. When the team gathered in the conference room, Jerry stood at the front, his heart pounding. He could see the tiredness in their eyes, the hesitation in their postures. They were waiting for him to say something, anything, that would tell them they weren't alone in this. "Look, I know the past few weeks have been tough," Jerry began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I've been hearing your concerns, and I've seen the way things have been changing. It's not easy, and I'm not going to pretend that it is. But I want you to know that I'm with you. We're in this together." He paused, looking at each of them: Mark, Lisa, Michelle, and the others. Their faces were a mix of skepticism and hope, but they were listening. And that was what mattered. "We're going to figure this out. We'll adapt, but we're not going to lose what made us special in the process. You're my team, and I'm not going to give up on you." For the first time in weeks, Jerry saw a flicker of hope in their eyes. He wasn't alone in this. They weren't alone. And together, they would fight to reclaim what they had lost. Jerry's decision to stand by his team wasn't an easy one. In fact, it felt like an impossible battle. The following days were filled with tension as he faced the consequences of his stand. The dealership continued to feel like a pressure cooker, with each passing day bringing new challenges, new obstacles, and mounting expectations. But Jerry knew deep down that he couldn't just abandon his employees. He couldn't betray the trust that had taken years to build. The first signs of trouble came quickly. Steph, who had always been the one to maintain a calm, collected exterior, was showing signs of frustration. His usual visits to the dealership became less frequent, and when he did come, his presence was more commanding, his tone sharper. It was clear he was growing impatient with the pace of change Jerry was implementing. Jerry could sense the tension in the air as Steph's disappointment became more evident. One morning, Jerry was sitting in his office, going through the latest customer satisfaction reports when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Steph. "We need to talk now." Jerry's stomach dropped. He hadn't expected it to come to this so soon. He stood up, taking a deep breath as he left his office. The dealership felt even quieter today, as if it too could sense the impending storm. As he approached the back office, Jerry could already hear Steph's voice, firm and tense, arguing with David. "I don't care what Jerry says," Steph's voice rang out from the hallway. "We can't afford to let this place go under. We've given him enough time, and he's still dragging his feet." Jerry hesitated for a moment, trying to gather his thoughts before entering. He knew this meeting would be different. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was personal. The stakes had been raised, and it was clear that both Steph and David were reaching their limits. He knocked once before entering. Both men stopped talking immediately, their eyes locking on him as he walked in. Steph's expression was hard, his eyes narrow, while David remained as composed as ever, his face impassive. "Jerry," Steph said, his voice tight, "we need to have a serious discussion." Jerry nodded, his throat suddenly dry. "I know things are tense right now, but I'm doing what I think is best for the team and the business." David shifted in his seat. "The business needs results, Jerry. We're past the point of being sentimental about loyalty. You're being given a chance to lead this team into the future, and you're hesitating. We can't afford hesitation. Jerry swallowed hard. He had heard this speech from David before, and it had always been about numbers, deadlines, and efficiency. But it felt different this time. It felt like he was being asked to sacrifice everything he had worked for: his integrity, his relationship with the team, and his vision for the dealership. "I'm not hesitating," Jerry said quietly, "but I won't sacrifice the people who've been here for years, who've been loyal to this dealership, just to push some new systems that aren't working for them. It's not right." Steph's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment, Jerry saw something shift in him. "Jerry," he began, his voice laced with a rare trace of frustration, "this is not about what's right or wrong. It's about what's necessary. And right now, you're holding this dealership back. You're holding your people back." Jerry felt the sting of those words, but he stood his ground. "I'm not holding anyone back. I'm trying to find a way to make this work for everyone, not just for the corporate people who want to see a return on their investment." David leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "You're being stubborn, Jerry, and it's not just about the people anymore. The dealership's reputation is on the line. We're on the brink of losing everything, and you're clinging to the past. If you don't adapt, you're going to watch this place go under." The words hit Jerry like a slap in the face. He had known that things were bad, but hearing it so plainly made the reality of the situation hit home. He couldn't let the dealership fail. Not after everything they had been through. Not after all the people who had worked tirelessly to build it from the ground up. But still, Jerry wasn't willing to compromise the values that had always guided him. There had to be another way. "I'm not giving up on this place, or on the people here," Jerry said, his voice firm despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "I'll find a way to make this work, but I'm not going to tear everything down just to satisfy the corporate gods." For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, Steph spoke, his voice colder now. "You've made your choice, Jerry, but know this. If you don't change your approach, you'll lose more than just your team. You'll lose your job, and this dealership will never be the same." With that, he stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. Jerry's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with the weight of what had just been said. Steph's words hung in the air like a warning, but Jerry didn't flinch. He knew what he had to do. As the meeting ended and both Steph and David left the room, Jerry sat alone in his office, his hands resting on the desk. The silence felt deafening. He was at a crossroads, a place where one wrong move could ruin everything. But Jerry had never been one to back down. He had spent years building relationships with the people at Victory Motors, and he wasn't about to let it all fall apart because of corporate pressure. If he had to fight for them, he would. He had to find a way to convince Steph and David that they could have both, change and loyalty. But was it too late? Had he waited too long to make a stand? The thought of losing his job, his team, and the dealership that had been his life for so many years haunted him. But he wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. Jerry's decision to stand firm had cost him. It wasn't just the tension in the air between him, Steph, and David. It was the cold, palpable divide that had taken root between the employees and management. The mood at the dealership was at an all-time low. It was no longer just about numbers. It was about trust. And trust, Jerry knew, was something that, once broken, could be incredibly difficult to rebuild. The following morning, as Jerry walked into the dealership, the place felt eerily quiet, like a battlefield after a storm. Employees were still there, but their smiles had faded, replaced by anxiety, tension, and, in some cases, outright defiance. It was as though the entire dealership was holding its breath, waiting for the next move, and Jerry could feel every set of eyes on him as he made his way to his office. As he sat down, the weight of his decisions, of his convictions, pressed on his chest like a ton of bricks. The air in his office was thick with uncertainty. He could feel the looming threat of corporate stepping in to take control, to replace him with someone more compliant, someone who was willing to move the dealership in the direction that David and Steph wanted. But Jerry wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He stood up, pacing across the room, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He needed a plan. A way to salvage this situation before it was too late. The phone rang, cutting through his inner turmoil. He answered on the second ring. "Jerry," it was Lisa's voice, strained but urgent. I need to talk to you. It's about Mark. Jerry's heart sank. Mark was one of the longest-tenured employees at the dealership, and the last thing Jerry wanted to hear was that one of his most loyal employees was in trouble. "What's going on, Lisa?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He's thinking of leaving," Lisa said, her voice cracking. "He's been talking to some of the other guys, and I think he's really serious about it. The way things are going, he doesn't think there's a future here anymore." Jerry's stomach twisted. He couldn't lose Mark, not after everything. Mark had been there from the beginning, and to lose him now, at a time when things were already so fragile, would be a devastating blow to everything Jerry had worked for. "Can you get him to meet me in my office?" Jerry said, his voice firm, though a tinge of worry crept in. "I'll talk to him." "I'll try," Lisa replied softly before hanging up. Jerry sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. He knew he had to act fast. Losing Mark would be a sign to the rest of the team that no one was safe, that loyalty meant nothing in the face of corporate priorities. That wasn't a message he could afford to send. About 30 minutes later, Mark walked into Jerry's office. The tall, broad-shouldered man looked worn, as though the weight of the past few days had taken a heavy toll on him. His eyes were tired, but there was something else there. A resignation, a feeling that he had already made up his mind. "Jerry," Mark said quietly, taking a seat across from him, "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. I've been here for over 15 years, and I've never seen things like this before. It's not the same place anymore." Jerry's heart clenched. He knew exactly what Mark was talking about. The dealership was no longer the tight-knit family it had once been. The pressure to change, to meet corporate demands, had stripped away the sense of community that had once defined Victory Motors. "I understand, Mark," Jerry said softly. "I know things have been tough, but I'm not giving up on this place. I'm fighting for all of you, for everything we've built here." Mark shook his head, a weary smile tugging at his lips. "It's not enough, Jerry. The changes are happening too fast. You're pushing everyone too hard. It's not just the systems and the new ways of doing things. It's the way people are being treated. We're not just cogs in a machine. We're people." Jerry's eyes burned as the weight of Mark's words settled in. He had known that things weren't perfect, but he hadn't realized how deeply the changes had affected his team. The loyalty that had once been the cornerstone of the dealership was unraveling, thread by thread. "I know, Mark," Jerry said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "I never meant for it to be like this. I should have listened more. I should have done more to make sure we were all on the same page." Mark stood up, running a hand over his face. "I don't know if it's fixable, Jerry. Maybe it's too late. Maybe all of this was inevitable." The pain in Mark's voice was like a knife to Jerry's chest. He had never imagined he would be faced with the possibility of losing someone like Mark. But the reality was clear now. The dealership was crumbling under the weight of corporate expectations, and no matter how hard Jerry fought, there were things he couldn't control. "I don't want you to leave, Mark," Jerry said, standing up to face him. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just give me a chance. Please." Mark hesitated for a long moment, looking Jerry in the eyes. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders sagging. "I don't know, Jerry. I really don't know." With that, Mark walked out of the office, leaving Jerry standing there, his heart heavy with doubt. The rest of the day felt like a blur to Jerry. Each conversation, each decision felt like it was leading to an inevitable collapse. The weight of his choices hung over him, and he could no longer deny the truth. Things were falling apart. The more he tried to hold on, the more it slipped away. Late that afternoon, as Jerry sat at his desk, staring blankly at the papers before him, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from David. It was short and to the point. "We need to have a final meeting. The decision has been made. Meet me in my office at 4 p.m. Jerry's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what this meant. The decision had been made. The corporate forces were taking control, and Jerry's position was no longer secure. This was the end of the line for him. He had fought as hard as he could, but in the end, the power of corporate interests had proved too strong. As the clock ticked closer to 4 p.m., Jerry stood up, taking one last look around the dealership. The place had been his life for so long, and now it was slipping away, piece by piece. He could only wonder what was next. What would become of the team, of the place he had called home for so many years? With a deep breath, he walked toward David's office, his mind clouded with uncertainty. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Do you think Jerry's fight is over? Can he turn things around? Or is it too late? What would you do if you were in Jerry's shoes? Jerry walked down the hallway toward David's office, each step heavier than the last. The weight of his choices pressed down on him with every breath. His thoughts were a whirlwind. Had he done the right thing? Had he fought hard enough for his people? He couldn't help but feel like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, the fall inevitable. As he reached David's office door, Jerry paused, taking a deep breath before knocking. A cold, mechanical voice from inside called out, "Come in." Jerry opened the door to find David sitting behind his sleek desk, his eyes scanning through a stack of papers. There was no smile, no friendly greeting, just the kind of cold professionalism Jerry had come to expect from the man. David didn't even look up as Jerry entered, his eyes still glued to the documents in front of him. "Sit down, Jerry," he said flatly. Jerry took the seat across from David, trying to steady his nerves. His palms were clammy, and his heart was racing. He had spent years building relationships, putting his heart into every decision, every strategy. But now, it felt like everything was crumbling, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't seem to hold it together. David finally looked up, his eyes piercing. "We've made our decision," he said, his voice businesslike, without any trace of sympathy. "The dealership needs a new direction, and you're not the one to lead it there." Jerry felt his stomach drop. It was what he had feared, what he had known in his gut. This was the end. David was cutting ties. But Jerry wasn't going to go down without a fight. "You're making a mistake, David," Jerry said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're tearing apart everything we've built. The team, the relationships, the trust. We can't just throw all that away for corporate interests." David's expression didn't change. He wasn't moved. "This isn't about sentiment, Jerry. It's about survival. The dealership needs someone who can make the tough decisions, who can bring in results. And frankly, you're not doing that." Jerry clenched his fists, his frustration rising. "I've been trying to make this place better. I've been trying to protect the people who have worked here for years. But you and Steph, you've been pushing for nothing but numbers and efficiency, at the expense of everything that made Victory Motors different." David leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "The reality is, Jerry, the dealership has been losing ground. People don't buy cars the way they used to. They want more than just a car. They want an experience. And right now, the experience here isn't enough. We need fresh leadership." Jerry shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. "So, that's it? You're going to fire me because I'm trying to hold on to the people, the values that made this place what it is?" David's eyes narrowed. "It's not just about you, Jerry. It's about the business as a whole. We've already begun the process of transitioning. You'll be compensated for your time here, but your position is no longer needed." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Everything Jerry had worked for, everything he had fought for, was being stripped away in an instant. His career, his future at Victory Motors, was over. The dealership was no longer his to lead. A silence hung in the air as Jerry processed the words. His mind was racing, but he couldn't think of anything to say. The finality of the situation felt suffocating. For a moment, he wanted to lash out, to argue, to beg David to reconsider. But something inside him told him that it was futile. David had made up his mind, and nothing he said would change it. "Is there anything else, Jerry?" David's voice interrupted his thoughts. Jerry looked at David, his chest tightening. "No, I guess that's it." David stood up and extended a hand across the desk. Jerry stared at it for a moment, then slowly reached out to shake it. The gesture felt hollow, a formality, a symbol of the end of an era. As Jerry stood to leave, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in weeks, the uncertainty, the stress, and the anxiety started to fade. He didn't have control over this situation anymore, but that didn't mean he was powerless. He had fought for what he believed in, and even though he had lost, he knew that he had stood up for the people who mattered. He had made his decision, and he wasn't going to regret it. Whatever happened next, He would find a way to move forward. As Jerry walked out of David's office and down the hallway, he passed by employees who didn't make eye contact, their faces filled with a mixture of pity and confusion. He could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't let it affect him. He had come to a place where he knew that no matter what happened to the dealership, the most important thing was the relationships he had built with these people. That couldn't be taken away. He exited the building and walked out into the parking lot, his footsteps heavy but resolute. The sky above was overcast, the clouds a reflection of the storm that had just passed through his life. But as he stood there, taking a deep breath, Jerry realized something. He was free. The weight that had been pressing on him for weeks, for months, had been lifted. He no longer had to answer to anyone. He no longer had to sacrifice his integrity for the sake of corporate demands. He was going to figure out what came next, but for now, he was free to make that decision without any outside pressure. As Jerry drove away from Victory Motors for the last time, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the end he had wanted, but it was the end that had to come. And now, he was ready to face whatever came next. Jerry had always believed that every ending was the beginning of something else. The trouble was, when you're standing at the edge of the unknown, it doesn't always feel like it. The world beyond the dealership felt vast, uncertain, and a bit intimidating. But as Jerry drove through the streets, the weight on his chest had lifted slightly. His mind was no longer clouded by pressure and corporate expectations. It was just him now, free to carve out whatever path he chose. As he made his way home, Jerry's phone buzzed in the passenger seat. He glanced at it and saw that it was a message from Lisa. The tight bond they'd formed during his time at Victory Motors still held strong, even after everything that had happened. She'd always been there for him, and he knew he could count on her, no matter what. "I heard. I'm so sorry, Jerry. I know how much you cared about the team. We all did. But we'll get through this. If you need to talk, I'm here." Jerry smiled to himself. Lisa had always been a constant, a voice of reason in the chaos. He quickly replied, "Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate it. Just need some time to figure things out." Pulling into his driveway, Jerry turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring at the house he had lived in for years. It was quiet, peaceful, even, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in him. It wasn't just about losing his job, it was about losing a part of himself. The version of Jerry who had been at Victory Motors for so long, who had fought for what he believed in, was gone. And now, he had to figure out who he was without that identity. Walking inside, Jerry was met by the silence of his home. His wife, Kate, was working late at the hospital, leaving him alone with his thoughts. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk to her about everything. He did. But he wasn't sure how to put the turmoil into words. Instead, Jerry made himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. The rhythmic clink of the spoon against the mug was the only sound in the house. He didn't have any clear answers. He didn't know if he was even ready to face the world outside, or if he just wanted to hide away for a while. As the evening wore on, Jerry found himself lost in thought. The memories of his time at the dealership kept creeping back. Those long hours spent at the office, the late-night meetings, the rush of victory when they closed a big deal, and the crushing disappointment when things went wrong. But through it all, there had been the people. The team. They were the ones who had kept him going. And that's when it hit him. The thing that had always motivated him. It wasn't the cars. It wasn't the bottom line. It was the people. It was about helping them, guiding them, making sure they had what they needed to succeed. Victory Motors had been a family, and Jerry had always thought of himself as its leader. But now that family was scattered, each person going in their own direction. Mark was gone. Lisa was still there. But for how long? The others, would they stay, or would they leave? The uncertainty gnawed at him. The next morning, Jerry awoke early, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't sit idle for long. He needed a new direction. He needed something that would give him purpose again. And the more he thought about it, the more one idea seemed to take shape. What if he didn't have to leave the car business entirely? What if there was a way to rebuild, but on his own terms? What if there was a space where people still mattered? Where he could still lead with integrity, not just numbers? That was it. Jerry had always been good at what he did. The dealership may have been in his rearview mirror, but he still had the knowledge, the skills, and, most importantly, the people who believed in him. He could start something new. Maybe it wouldn't be the grand, flashy dealership that he'd once dreamed of, but it could be something better. Something that focused on what really mattered: relationships, trust. He picked up his phone and texted Lisa. "Hey, do you think we could talk soon? I've got an idea. Something I think could work for all of us. Let me know when you're free." The response was almost immediate. "I'm free after 3 p.m. Let's talk." "I'm curious now." Jerry smiled. Maybe this was the start of something new. He wasn't entirely sure what it would look like yet, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope. The rest of the day was spent mulling over ideas, jotting down notes. What if he could create a dealership that truly understood the value of loyalty, the importance of a personal touch? What if he could build a place where the employees felt valued, where the customers weren't just numbers, but people with real needs? By the time he met with Lisa later that afternoon, Jerry had a rough plan in his mind. He wasn't sure if it was viable, but he was willing to try. Lisa sat across from him at a small cafe, her face a mixture of curiosity and caution. "So, what's this big idea of yours?" she asked, leaning forward. Jerry grinned, feeling the weight of the past few days begin to lift. "What if we started our own thing? A dealership, small, personal, focused on customer service and loyalty. No corporate strings attached. Just us, doing what we do best." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "You mean, like a mom-and-pop shop?" "Exactly," Jerry said, his voice filled with conviction. "We build a business that puts people first. No more corporate nonsense. No more getting lost in the numbers. Just a place where customers feel like they matter, and where employees don't feel like they're just cogs in the machine." Lisa looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the idea. Then she nodded slowly. "You know that could work. I don't know if it's going to be easy, but I'm in." Jerry felt a rush of excitement. He had no illusions that it would be easy. He knew it would take hard work, dedication, and a leap of faith. But for the first time in a long while, Jerry felt like he had found a new mission. A way to rebuild, to create something meaningful again. This was just the beginning. The idea was born, but now came the hard part, taking the first steps. For the past few days, Jerry had been consumed with the concept of starting his own dealership, one that stood for something different, something better. But how do you go from having a big idea to making it a reality? It wasn't as if Jerry had no experience in the car business. He'd been in it long enough to know the ropes. But the logistics, the funding, the planning, it was an entirely different beast. And to make things even more complicated, he didn't have much capital to work with. He had his savings, sure, but it wasn't enough to launch a full-scale dealership from scratch. Still, he wasn't about to let that stop him. The first person he reached out to was Lisa. He knew that if this was going to work, she would be a crucial part of it. She had experience in both sales and management, and Jerry knew that she was someone he could trust to make this idea thrive. Lisa, as always, was on board from the moment she heard his pitch. "I think we can make this work, Jerry," she said, her voice laced with determination. "But we need to make sure we have a plan that speaks to the kind of people we're trying to attract." The two of them spent hours brainstorming at Jerry's kitchen table, drawing up rough business plans and discussing the type of vehicles they would focus on. They weren't going to try to compete with the big dealerships. They weren't going to be able to offer massive inventories or flashy marketing campaigns. What they could offer was a personalized experience, a place where people felt cared for, heard, and respected. After laying the groundwork for their business model, they had to face the harsh reality. They needed money to get started. Jerry went to his savings account. It wasn't enough to cover all their expenses, especially with their long-term plans of having a small, yet carefully curated, inventory of vehicles. He could cover some costs, but they needed more, much more. "Okay, Lisa, we're going to have to get creative here," Jerry said one evening as they sat in the dimly lit diner booth, the hum of conversation around them blending with the clink of silverware. "Creative how?" Lisa asked, tilting her head. "We need investors," Jerry replied, voice serious. "But not the typical ones. Not those big corporate types. We need people who believe in what we're trying to do, people who get it." Lisa's eyes widened as she thought it over. "You mean, we need to sell this vision to people who have the money to back it?" "Exactly," Jerry said. I think we can approach some of the local small business owners. We start small, build a reputation, and then we grow. It was risky, but they didn't have many other options. So, Jerry made calls. He reached out to old friends, acquaintances from his time at Victory Motors, and local investors who had always expressed interest in the car business. Some were skeptical, others downright dismissive, but Jerry didn't give up. He spent hours crafting pitches, refining his vision, and doing everything he could to get people on board. One evening, after weeks of calling and meeting with various investors, Jerry got the call he'd been hoping for. The owner of a local hardware store, Dave Mitchell, agreed to meet with him. Dave wasn't just any investor. He was someone Jerry had known for years, someone who had always expressed an interest in the car business but never quite took the leap. Jerry met Dave at a local cafe, nerves buzzing in his chest. This meeting could change everything. Dave was an older man, in his mid-50s, with a firm handshake and a no-nonsense attitude. After exchanging pleasantries, Jerry dove right into his pitch. He told Dave about the new dealership idea, the personalized service, the commitment to building relationships with customers, and the goal to stay small but impactful. At first, Dave was quiet, taking it all in. But after a long pause, he spoke. "Jerry, you know I've been in business for a long time. I've seen people come and go, seen plenty of ideas crash and burn. But I believe in you. I've always believed in you. You've got the grit, the heart, and the people behind you. I'm willing to invest." Jerry nearly jumped out of his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the break they needed. Dave continued, "I'm not offering you a fortune, but I can get you started. Let's see what you can do with a small investment. You've got the vision. Now it's time to show me the results." Jerry could hardly believe his ears. He quickly shook Dave's hand, sealing the deal. It wasn't everything they needed, but it was a solid start. The foundation had been laid. Over the next few weeks, Jerry and Lisa got to work on the next steps, securing a location, finding vehicles to sell, and making the necessary legal and financial arrangements. It was a whirlwind of activity. Jerry felt like he was juggling 100 things at once, but he couldn't ignore the excitement that built within him. They decided on a modest location, an old, slightly run-down building that they could afford. It wasn't glamorous, but it had potential. It had space for a small showroom, enough parking for a few cars, and a high-traffic area that would bring in customers who were curious about what they were offering. With Dave's investment in hand, Jerry and Lisa hired a small team of employees, many of them former colleagues from Victory Motors, who had been just as disillusioned by the corporate takeover. They were all eager to be a part of something different. As they worked day by day, transforming the space, Jerry couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He wasn't just creating a dealership. He was creating a place where people could connect, a place that didn't care about flashy ads or big-name car brands. It just cared about the people it served. When the dealership was finally ready to open, Jerry and Lisa stood together outside the doors, staring at the sign above them, Heart and Soul Motors. It was a simple name, but it represented everything they stood for. And as they unlocked the door and stepped inside, Jerry knew that this was only the beginning. Lisa stood beside him, her expression a mirror of his own. She had been with him every step of the way, from the initial idea to the countless hours of work it had taken to get to this point. They both knew that opening day was just the beginning, but it was still a major milestone. They had invested everything, time, energy, and even their own savings, into this dream. The reality of it all was just beginning to settle in. "This is it," Jerry said, his voice thick with anticipation. "Our moment." Lisa smiled, but there was a touch of nervousness in her eyes. "We've worked hard for this, Jerry, but now we need to show people that we mean it. We've got to prove it's more than just a slogan." Jerry nodded. "Exactly. It's not just about selling cars. It's about creating relationships. We want our customers to feel like they're part of something. We want them to know that we care." The doors of Heart and Soul Motors swung open, and Jerry took a deep breath before stepping inside. The small showroom was lined with a few carefully selected vehicles, each one polished to perfection. The space was simple, no flashy banners or extravagant decorations, just clean lines and a welcoming atmosphere. They had already put up signs and flyers around town, and there had been some buzz leading up to the opening. Jerry knew they wouldn't see a flood of customers immediately, but he was hoping the right ones would come through. The kind of people who appreciated what they were trying to build. As the minutes ticked by, Jerry couldn't help but feel the weight of expectation bearing down on him. He paced the floor, checking every detail, making sure everything was in place. Lisa was setting up the coffee station in the corner, a small touch that would hopefully make people feel more at home. At 9 a.m., the first car pulled into the lot. Jerry straightened up, trying to hide his excitement, but it was impossible not to notice the growing sense of hope rising in him. A customer. A real customer. The man who stepped out of the car was a middle-aged man, dressed in a polo shirt and khaki pants. He looked around the lot, clearly a bit uncertain but intrigued. Jerry smiled and approached him, extending a hand. "Good morning. Welcome to Heart and Soul Motors. My name's Jerry, and this is Lisa. How can we help you today?" The man looked him up and down, as if evaluating whether he was going to be sold something, or whether this place was worth his time. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "I'm just browsing, looking for something reliable. Not sure what you've got in stock." Jerry's heart raced. This was it. He took a deep breath and gestured toward the vehicles. "Well, we focus on building trust with our customers," Jerry said. "We don't just want to sell you a car, we want to help you find the right one. Take your time and let us know if you have any questions." The man nodded, his suspicion easing slightly. He wandered toward one of the vehicles on display, a used SUV that was in great condition. Lisa joined him, ready to answer any questions. Jerry stepped back and watched. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The man wasn't running away, and that was a good sign. Over the next few hours, more customers trickled in. Some stayed for a while, others only glanced at the cars before moving on. There were no big sales yet, but Jerry and Lisa didn't expect that. What they were seeing was more important. People were walking in, engaging, and, most importantly, listening. As the day went on, a few more cars were sold. Nothing monumental, but the first few successes were significant. Jerry didn't care that it wasn't a landslide. He cared that it was real. They were building relationships with every customer who walked through the door. They were showing people that this wasn't just about making a quick sale. It was about creating a connection. Around noon, a couple walked in. They were younger, in their early 30s, and looked like they were in the market for a family car. Jerry introduced himself, and they immediately hit it off. They didn't rush into anything. Instead, they spent time discussing their needs, what they wanted out of a car, and their budget. "We're looking for something that's safe, reliable, but also affordable," the woman said. "We don't want to be pressured into anything." Lisa jumped in with a smile. "We don't do pressure here. We want you to be comfortable with your decision." Jerry could see that they appreciated the honesty. As they looked at a few options, Jerry could tell this wasn't just about the car. This was about showing them they mattered. After nearly an hour of discussing options, the couple made their choice. They decided on a well-maintained minivan that fit their needs perfectly. Jerry and Lisa handled the paperwork, and with a handshake, the couple left with their new car, happy with the experience. By the time the day was winding down, Jerry couldn't wipe the smile off his face. It wasn't a perfect day. There had been plenty of hiccups. Some of the cars weren't as polished as he would have liked, and they hadn't quite hit the numbers they'd hoped for. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that they had made it. They had opened the doors, and people had responded. It wasn't just about selling cars. It was about building trust and reputation, two things Jerry knew were hard to come by in the car business. But at Heart and Soul Motors, it was going to be the foundation. As he locked up for the night, Jerry turned to Lisa. "You know what? I think we're going to make it. I really do." Lisa smiled, a bit of exhaustion in her eyes. "It's just the beginning, Jerry, but it's a damn good start." And for the first time in a long time, Jerry felt like he was on the right path. The road ahead would be full of challenges, no doubt, but it was theirs to travel. Together, Jerry's heart swelled with pride as Heart and Soul Motors entered its second week. The momentum was slow, but it was building, and every sale felt like a win. Every customer who walked in through the doors and left with a smile was a victory. Jerry knew it wouldn't be long before word of mouth would spread, and they'd start gaining more traction. But nothing in the car business was ever that easy. There was always something lurking just around the corner, waiting to throw a wrench into the works. It started with an email. Jerry sat in his office, surrounded by the calm of the afternoon, when he noticed an unfamiliar name pop up in his inbox. His curiosity piqued. He clicked on it. Dear Jerry, we regret to inform you that Victory Motors is contesting your use of the name Heart and Soul Motors. We have a trademark on the phrase heart and soul in relation to the automotive industry and will be pursuing legal action unless you cease using it immediately. Sincerely, Gregory Hayes, General Counsel, Victory Motors. Jerry read the email twice, just to make sure he wasn't missing something. His stomach dropped, the words blurring slightly. Victory Motors? They were the very company that Jerry had left behind. The same corporation that had taken over the dealership where he had worked for years. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He had known that starting a business wasn't going to be all sunshine and rainbows. But this felt like a punch in the gut. What's wrong? Lisa asked from the door, having entered the office without him hearing her footsteps. Jerry handed her the laptop. Victory Motors is coming after us. They're saying we can't use the name Heart and Soul Motors because they hold a trademark on heart and soul in relation to the car industry. Lisa's face dropped as she read through the email. This can't be real. They're just trying to intimidate us. They've got the power, Lisa, Jerry said, his voice low with frustration. They've got money, resources. If they want us out, they can make it happen. Lisa set the laptop down, her eyes meeting Jerry's. We can't back down. We've worked too hard for this. This is our name now. Jerry stared at the floor for a moment, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. But they could bury us in legal fees. They could drain everything we've worked for. And what if they win? What happens to us then? Lisa stepped forward, her voice firm. Then we fight. We fight because we're not giving up. This is our chance to do something meaningful. We're not going to let them take that from us. She was right. Jerry knew it, deep down. This wasn't just about a name. It was about their vision, their dream. This was their moment to prove that they wouldn't be crushed by the corporate world they had left behind. I'll call a lawyer, Jerry said, resolve starting to replace his panic. We need to figure out our options. But as he reached for his phone, Lisa grabbed his arm. We don't need to do this alone. We've got people who believe in us. We're not the only ones who want to see them fail. Her words hit Jerry like a ton of bricks. He knew she was right. This fight wasn't just theirs. It was theirs and the community's. The people who had already started to support them. The customers who had given their trust. The friends and family who had backed them every step of the way. Jerry knew what he had to do. All right, let's fight. But we'll need all the help we can get. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations, meetings with their small circle of supporters, and brainstorming ways to handle the situation without compromising their integrity. They could have chosen to give up, to change the name, to back down. But they didn't. They couldn't. Jerry also reached out to Dave Mitchell, their first investor, to explain the situation. Dave wasn't a lawyer, but he had decades of experience navigating the business world. After hearing the details, Dave was resolute. We won't let them walk all over you, Dave said, his voice gruff but confident. I'll make a few calls. We'll get you some real legal support. This isn't the first time a big company's tried to intimidate someone smaller than them. Let's see what we can do. True to his word, Dave connected Jerry with a lawyer who specialized in intellectual property and business law. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Lane, took one look at the email and was immediately interested in the case. We've got a strong position here, Rebecca said after reviewing the trademark Victory Motors was claiming. We can challenge the trademark itself. They may hold the trademark, but we'll argue that the name isn't truly distinctive in their industry. There's a chance we can get them to back down without having to go to court. Rebecca's words gave Jerry a sense of hope, but the legal road ahead was still steep and uncertain. They could be looking at months, even years of legal wrangling. The thought of the financial strain that might come with this was almost overwhelming. But with Rebecca's help, Jerry felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't going to let a corporation like Victory Motors crush their dream just because they had the money and power. He wasn't alone in this fight, and neither was Lisa. They began to rally support from other small business owners in the area, many of whom had also been on the receiving end of Victory Motors' aggressive tactics. It wasn't just about their dealership anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. The more people Jerry talked to, the more he realized just how much this battle had grown. He was no longer fighting just for himself. He was fighting for something much larger, the future of small businesses and the promise that people like him and Lisa could make a difference. Victory Motors had underestimated them, and Jerry was determined to show them just how wrong they were. As the days passed, Jerry and Lisa worked tirelessly, keeping the doors of Heart and Soul Motors open while simultaneously battling the looming threat from Victory Motors. They were fully aware that this fight wasn't going to be easy, and the prospect of long legal proceedings hung over them like a storm cloud. But they weren't backing down. This was their fight, one that had become much bigger than just the dealership. One afternoon, just after lunch, Jerry was sitting in his office, poring over some paperwork when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was a text message from Dave Mitchell. "Call me when you have a minute. Got some good news." Jerry didn't waste a second. He immediately dialed Dave's number. "Hey Dave, what's the news?" Jerry asked, trying to keep the hope out of his voice. He knew better than to get excited before hearing the details. "You won't believe it, Jerry," Dave said, his voice full of energy. "I've been talking to some of my contacts, and it turns out Victory Motors is getting a lot of heat from the small business community. A lot of people are fed up with their aggressive tactics. They're getting a reputation for bullying the little guys. And guess what? One of those little guys is offering to help." Jerry leaned forward, gripping the phone tightly. "What are you talking about? Who's offering to help?" "A group of independent dealerships from the area," Dave explained. "They've been watching your story, and they're pissed about Victory's threats. They've seen the damage these guys can do, and they want to stand with you. They're willing to support you, even help with the legal fees if it comes to that." Jerry was stunned. He hadn't expected this kind of support, not from the larger business community, especially not from other dealerships. He had expected a few pats on the back, maybe some encouraging words, but this was real. "That's incredible," Jerry said, his heart lifting. "But I don't want to take advantage of anyone. How can we make sure this isn't just a charity case? I want to fight this on our own terms." "Don't worry, Jerry," Dave said with a chuckle. "These guys are on your side because they know what Victory is capable of. They're not giving you charity, they're backing a cause. They see the potential in Heart and Soul Motors, and they want to help keep you alive and kicking." Jerry leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a moment to process this new development. "How can I thank them? How can I show them that we're serious about this?" "You'll show them by winning, Jerry," Dave replied with a grin. "That's all they need. Winning means more than any thank you could. You just keep doing what you're doing, and they'll be right there with you." The conversation left Jerry energized. It was clear that this was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that small businesses had a place in the world and that they didn't have to bow to the likes of Victory Motors. As soon as Jerry hung up with Dave, he called Lisa to share the news. She was equally elated, but there was something deeper in her voice, a sense of pride, as though the community was finally rallying behind their shared vision. They weren't alone in this fight anymore. "We've got a network now," Lisa said. "A network of people who believe in what we're doing. It's not just about us anymore. It's about standing up for everyone who's been knocked down by the big guys." Jerry agreed, his mind racing with possibilities. He wasn't sure where this new support would take them, but one thing was clear: they had allies. And with those allies, they could take on anything. The next morning, Jerry and Lisa met with a group of independent dealerships who had reached out to offer their support. They gathered around a large conference table, a mix of seasoned veterans of the auto industry and younger entrepreneurs who shared Jerry's vision for community-driven business practices. The mood was determined, yet hopeful. The leader of the group, a man named Tom Harris, stood at the head of the table. He was tall, with a no-nonsense demeanor but a warmth in his eyes that immediately put Jerry at ease. "We're here because we believe in what you're doing, Jerry," Tom began, looking around the table at the others before his eyes returned to Jerry. "Victory Motors isn't just a giant, they're a bully. And we're done being bullied. You've got our support, and we're going to make sure that they know they can't run over you." Jerry felt a wave of gratitude and determination wash over him. "I don't know what to say, Tom. This means more than you know. I've always believed that the car business could be more than just about selling cars. It's about trust. It's about relationships. And I want to show everyone that it's possible." Tom nodded. That's why we're here. We've been where you are, standing up against companies that think they can push everyone around. We've learned a few things along the way, and we're ready to share them. Lisa sat beside Jerry, her hand resting lightly on his arm. We're ready to fight, she said, her voice unwavering. But we need a game plan. What can we do to make sure we win this? Tom smiled, a look of confidence settling on his face. First things first, we get a lawyer who knows how to go toe-to-toe with Victory. Second, we raise awareness. We make this a public battle. Victory Motors wants to scare you into backing down. But if we expose what they're doing, we can turn the public opinion in our favor. Jerry's heart skipped a beat. It was a smart strategy. Force Victory Motors into the spotlight, where their bully tactics would be exposed to the world. The public backlash alone could shift the balance of power. We've got a lot of connections. Another dealer, Gina, chimed in. Local news outlets, social media influencers, and even some of our loyal customers. If we pull everyone together, Victory won't stand a chance. Jerry felt his pulse quicken with hope. With a plan in place, they could take on the giant that had threatened to crush them. It wasn't going to be easy, but with the support of this group and the backing of their community, they could do it. The fight had only just begun, but Jerry was more certain than ever that they were going to win. The momentum was building. What had started as a small battle between an independent dealership and a corporate giant was turning into a full-fledged community movement. Jerry had always dreamed of running a business that wasn't just about selling cars. It was about creating relationships, building trust, and standing for something meaningful. Now, with his new allies by his side and a community beginning to rally behind him, Jerry knew that this fight was about more than just his dealership. It was about sending a message to the entire business world. The first step in their plan was simple but powerful: expose Victory Motors' bullying tactics. They couldn't keep this fight in the shadows anymore. It was time to bring it into the light. Over the next few days, Jerry and Lisa worked with the other independent dealerships to craft a public statement. They'd already reached out to local media outlets, and the plan was to release a press statement that would make Victory Motors' aggressive tactics the talk of the town. They had to make sure that the public was on their side, that consumers and local businesses alike would see just how unfair this fight was. We're not just going to expose them, Lisa said one evening, as she and Jerry sat down at the conference table with their legal team. We're going to do it in a way that highlights why it matters. It's not just about a trademark. It's about protecting small businesses, protecting the backbone of this community. Jerry nodded, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could make this work. We need to make it clear that we're fighting for the future of the little guy. That's the key. They crafted their message carefully. They focused on the fact that Victory Motors had bullied not just Jerry, but other small dealerships in the area. Victory Motors was using its trademark as a weapon, something that Jerry knew would resonate with the public. People hated bullies, and this was their chance to show everyone exactly what kind of company Victory Motors was. After finalizing the statement, they sent it out to local media outlets and posted it on their social media channels. Almost immediately, the story started to pick up traction. Local news stations called for interviews, and reporters wanted to know more about the legal battle that Jerry was facing. But it wasn't just the local news that took notice. As word spread through social media, people began sharing the story. Jerry wasn't just a businessman fighting a corporation. He was a symbol of resistance. The hashtag Heart and Soul Motors fight started trending. Customers who had bought cars from Jerry shared their positive experiences, urging others to support a business that stood for something bigger than just the bottom line. But Jerry knew it wasn't enough to rely solely on public sentiment. The battle with Victory Motors would be won in the courtroom. So, they worked tirelessly with their lawyer, Rebecca, to prepare their case. Victory Motors was going to throw everything they had at them, and Jerry needed to be ready. Rebecca laid out the plan. We're going to challenge Victory's trademark. It's not going to be easy, but we have a solid case. If we can prove that their trademark is overly broad or that it's too generic, we can get it invalidated. That's our strongest option. The team had the backing of the independent dealerships, who agreed to assist with the legal costs and provide any evidence they had of Victory Motors' unfair practices. But Jerry also knew that their best shot at winning was not just relying on the law, but winning the hearts of the people. And that's when Jerry had an idea. We need to have a rally, Jerry said one afternoon as he sat in his office, his mind ticking over the next step in their plan. We need to show the community just how many people are behind us. If we can get a few hundred people out here, hell, a few thousand, Victory Motors will see that we're not just a tiny dealership. We're a movement. Lisa raised an eyebrow. You want to organize a rally? Jerry nodded. Exactly. We can have speeches, music, car showcases, even a raffle. We'll get everyone involved. But more importantly, we'll make it a statement. We'll show them that we're standing together, that the community supports us. It was a bold idea, and one that felt risky. But Jerry could see the potential. The more people that came out in support, the harder it would be for Victory Motors to continue their bullying tactics. The rally would be their chance to show the world that Heart and Soul Motors was more than just a business. It was a symbol of what small businesses could achieve when they stood together. Lisa smiled, clearly warming to the idea. Okay, let's do it. Over the next 2 weeks, the team worked around the clock to plan the rally. They reached out to local businesses, musicians, and influencers to participate. They designed flyers, social media ads, and even a website to keep everyone updated on the event. They spread the word far and wide, and as the day of the rally grew closer, the excitement in the community was palpable. When the day finally arrived, the weather couldn't have been better. The sun shone brightly, and the air was warm but not too hot, perfect for an outdoor event. Jerry arrived early at the dealership, standing outside and taking in the energy that was already building. Volunteers set up booths, music blared from speakers, and the first few cars rolled in, each one displaying a small but significant piece of support for the cause. By noon, the rally was in full swing. Local vendors set up tents, providing food and drinks to the crowd. There were speeches from local business owners, passionate people talking about the importance of supporting independent businesses and how Heart and Soul Motors had represented something bigger than just a dealership. It had become a symbol of hope for the underdogs. When Jerry took the stage to speak, the crowd erupted in applause. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked out over the sea of people gathered in front of him. He never expected this kind of turnout. Thousands of people had come together in support of his fight, and now it felt more real than ever. We've all seen the power that big companies have, Jerry began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We've all seen how they try to crush us under their heel. But this is our fight. This is about showing that we matter, that small businesses matter, and we're not going to let anyone take that away from us. Together, we'll show them that we won't be silenced. The crowd roared with approval. Jerry's words rang out, echoing in the hearts of everyone who had come to support him. The rally was a success beyond their wildest expectations. The media was there, broadcasting the event live, and the story spread like wildfire. Victory Motors was now facing public pressure from every direction, and they hadn't even seen the full force of what Jerry and his team had planned. The rally was a game changer. Jerry could feel it. The outpouring of support from the community, the media coverage, and the powerful statements made by local leaders had painted Victory Motors into a corner. The momentum had shifted, and Jerry now had the public on his side. But while the rally had been a triumph in its own right, Jerry knew that the real battle was still ahead. In the days following the rally, the pressure on Victory Motors began to mount. Their public image took a hit as stories of their aggressive tactics spread. Local news stations aired segments highlighting the underdog story of Heart and Soul Motors, and social media was flooded with posts using the hashtag Heart and Soul Motors fight. Victory Motors' legal team was scrambling to contain the growing tide of negative attention. Jerry and Lisa were in the office one morning when Rebecca, their lawyer, called with some critical news. "Jerry, I've got something for you," Rebecca said, her voice low but filled with urgency. "We've just received some documents that Victory Motors would rather keep under wraps. It's a smoking gun." Jerry sat up straight, his heart racing. "What do you mean, smoking gun?" Rebecca explained, "I've got internal memos from Victory's legal department. These documents show that they've used questionable tactics in the past to force smaller dealerships to sell out. They've manipulated the trademark system to shut down competition, and they've even gone as far as to intimidate businesses into paying settlements. It's all right here." Lisa exchanged a look with Jerry. The stakes had just gotten much higher. "Are you saying they've been doing this to others?" Jerry asked. "Exactly. And it's all documented. We're going to use this in court," Rebecca replied. But there's one catch. Victory Motors is going to fight tooth and nail to keep these documents sealed. We'll need to move fast. Jerry knew this was their moment. This was the strike they'd been waiting for, the evidence they needed to not only win their case, but also to deliver a devastating blow to Victory Motors' reputation. But they had to be careful. Victory Motors wasn't going to back down easily. "We can't let them bury this," Jerry said, his mind whirring with possibilities. "Let's get this out to the press. If we can get the media to cover this, Victory won't have a leg to stand on." Rebecca agreed. "I'll handle the legal side, but we'll need to coordinate with the press. If we can release this information before Victory has a chance to suppress it, the public pressure will be too much for them to handle." And so, the plan was set into motion. Rebecca filed a motion to unseal the documents, and Jerry and Lisa worked with their media contacts to ensure that the story would break wide open. They didn't just want to win in the courtroom. They wanted the entire world to see what Victory Motors had been up to. Within 24 hours, the documents had been leaked to the press, and the story hit the news like a bombshell. The public was shocked. News outlets ran headlines like, "Victory Motors exposed," "Corporate bullying tactics revealed," and "Victory Motors caught in shady trademark practices." The documents showed a long history of manipulation, intimidation, and corporate greed, and the backlash was immediate. Social media exploded. People were furious. Many of the same customers who had once supported Victory Motors were now questioning their loyalty. A wave of sympathy surged toward Heart and Soul Motors, and the hashtag Victory Exposed quickly surpassed hashtag Heart and Soul Motors fight in trending discussions. It wasn't just the small business community now. It was consumers, advocates for fair business practices, and even former employees of Victory Motors who came forward to support Jerry. Victory Motors tried to downplay the revelations, claiming the documents were taken out of context and that their practices had always been above board. But the damage had already been done. Their credibility was shot. Jerry watched the fallout unfold with a sense of disbelief. The battle had shifted dramatically, and he could feel the tide turning in their favor. But he knew that Victory Motors wasn't going to go down without a fight. "We've got them on the ropes, but they're going to come back swinging," Jerry said to Lisa, as they watched the news coverage from his office. Lisa nodded. "We can't let up now. They'll try to discredit us, twist the narrative. We need to stay on the offensive." But Jerry wasn't worried about what Victory would do next. They had already exposed the truth. The public knew what kind of company Victory Motors was, and that would be hard for them to recover from. However, Jerry also knew that they couldn't rest on their laurels. This fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. As the weeks went by, the court battle loomed large. Jerry's legal team was ready to strike, and the evidence against Victory Motors was undeniable. But what was even more powerful than the legal case was the groundswell of public support. The community was behind them, and that made all the difference. Jerry stood outside Heart and Soul Motors, looking at the rows of cars on the lot, each one representing the business they were fighting to protect. His heart swelled with gratitude. It wasn't just the cars. It was the people, the employees, and the customers who had rallied around them. This was their victory, not just his. "We're not backing down," Jerry said, turning to Lisa. "We've got a chance to change everything. Not just for us, but for everyone who's ever had to face down a bully like Victory Motors." Lisa smiled. "We're in this together, and we're going to win." Victory Motors was reeling from the media frenzy, but Jerry knew the real test was still ahead. The court battle was set, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just about a dealership anymore. It was about defending everything Jerry had worked for and standing up for the smaller businesses that didn't have the resources or power to fight back against corporate giants. Jerry and his legal team spent days preparing. Rebecca worked tirelessly to ensure every document was in order and that they were ready to present their case in the most compelling way possible. Jerry, for the first time in his life, was involved in a legal fight that could change everything, and while the pressure was mounting, he wasn't backing down. He couldn't afford to. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Reporters lined the back of the room, their cameras flashing as Jerry entered. The media had followed this case closely, and now that they had the documents exposing Victory Motors' shady dealings, there was no shortage of interest. Every major news outlet had a reporter covering the proceedings. Jerry sat at the table with his legal team, trying to maintain his composure. Lisa was beside him, her presence a comforting reminder of how far they had come. Rebecca stood up to address the court, her voice confident and unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about more than just a trademark dispute. It is about the right of small businesses to exist and thrive without the oppressive tactics of a corporation that seeks to monopolize and intimidate. Victory Motors has used its legal power to bully independent dealerships like Heart and Soul Motors, pushing them out of the market and forcing them to accept settlements or face years of legal battles. Rebecca paused to let her words sink in. The jury was attentive, leaning forward in their seats. Jerry could feel the tension in the room, but he also knew that this was their moment to make a lasting impression. Victory Motors has systematically used its trademark not as a tool for protecting its brand, but as a weapon to suppress competition, Rebecca continued. The documents we've presented to you today make it clear that this is not an isolated incident. This is part of a larger pattern of behavior, one that has caused irreparable harm to local businesses and to the very fabric of our community. Jerry could see the jury's eyes widening as Rebecca laid out the facts. She wasn't just presenting evidence. She was telling a story, one that framed Jerry's fight as part of a larger battle against corporate greed and exploitation. The jury needed to understand that this was bigger than the two parties in the courtroom. This was about the future of small businesses everywhere. Victory Motors' defense team was up next. They were a well-oiled machine, poised and polished, and they had come prepared with their own set of arguments. The lead attorney, a slick, well-dressed man named Brian Harris, stood up and immediately addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just heard from the plaintiff's side is nothing but a distorted narrative. Heart and Soul Motors is simply looking for a way to avoid paying for their violation of trademark law. The evidence that has been presented is inconclusive and irrelevant. This is a matter of protecting intellectual property and ensuring fair competition. There's no conspiracy here, just a business trying to protect what's rightfully theirs. Brian's voice was smooth, his words carefully chosen. Jerry could feel the weight of their arguments, but he wasn't backing down. He knew their case was strong, and he trusted Rebecca and his team to make sure that everyone saw the truth. The trial dragged on for days, with both sides presenting their arguments and calling in expert witnesses. The evidence that Jerry's team had gathered was damning, and the jury was starting to see through Victory Motors' attempts to deflect responsibility. The documents detailing the bullying tactics had been released to the public, and they were undeniable. Victory Motors couldn't hide from the truth anymore. But even as the case seemed to lean in their favor, Jerry knew that the most difficult part of the trial was yet to come. The final day was reserved for closing arguments, and Jerry's nerves were on edge. This was the moment that could tip the scales. He had to trust that everything they had worked for would come together in this final push. The courtroom was silent as Rebecca stood up for her closing statement. She looked at the jury, her expression calm but intense. "We've heard a lot of talk about trademarks and intellectual property," Rebecca began. "But what we're really talking about here is fairness. What we're talking about is the kind of world we want to live in. Do we want a world where the big players get to bully the little guys? Do we want a world where a corporation can use its power to destroy local businesses and crush dreams? Or do we want to live in a world where people like Jerry can stand up for what's right and build something that matters?" Rebecca paused, letting her words hang in the air. Victory Motors may have the money, the resources, and the legal firepower, but what they don't have is the truth on their side. And the truth is, Jerry's fight is not just about protecting his dealership. It's about protecting every single person who has ever been told they don't have a chance. It's about standing up to the bullies and saying, "Enough." The courtroom was still, every person hanging on Rebecca's words. Jerry could see the jury's faces soften. They were getting it. This wasn't just a legal dispute, it was a moral one. Jerry and his team have shown that they are willing to fight for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against them, Rebecca concluded. Now, it's your turn to decide what kind of world we live in. Jerry felt a wave of emotion rise within him as Rebecca sat down. This wasn't just about winning the case. It was about making a statement, and it felt like they had done that. The jury deliberated for several hours, and by the time they returned to the courtroom, Jerry's heart was pounding. The foreman of the jury stood and announced, "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Heart and Soul Motors, and order that Victory Motors' trademark be invalidated. Additionally, we recommend that Victory Motors pay restitution for the damages caused by their actions. A hush fell over the courtroom. Jerry could hardly believe it. They had won. The courtroom erupted in applause as the jury's decision was read aloud. Lisa squeezed Jerry's hand, and he felt a surge of relief and joy. This was the moment he had been fighting for. The tide had turned, and the underdog had won. The days following the courtroom victory were a blur of celebration, media appearances, and public appearances. Victory Motors had been handed a significant blow, both legally and reputationally. Their tarnished image became the focal point of countless news reports, with experts discussing the company's now exposed tactics and what this meant for the future of corporate dealings. It was a full-scale public relations nightmare for Victory Motors, but for Jerry and Heart and Soul Motors, it felt like the beginning of a new era. The victory in court had been more than just a legal win. It had been a symbol of hope for every small business owner who had ever felt powerless in the face of corporate giants. Jerry and his team had shown that even the most formidable adversaries could be defeated when the truth was on your side. But as much as Jerry reveled in the win, he knew that there was still a lot of work ahead. The courtroom battle had been intense, but now came the real challenge. What came next? What would Heart and Soul Motors look like in the long term, and how would they recover from the financial toll of the long fight? Jerry knew that the victory wasn't just about dismantling Victory Motors. It was about ensuring that their dealership would thrive in a world that was now watching them. They needed to build on the momentum of the win, strengthen the foundation they had, and make sure they were ready for whatever came next. One evening, after a particularly long day of media interviews, Jerry and Lisa sat in the office, discussing their next steps. "You know," Lisa said, leaning back in her chair, "we've got a lot of people watching us now. We've got to make sure we're more than just the little guy who fought back. We need to show everyone that this wasn't just about fighting for survival. It was about creating something better." Jerry nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. We've made our point, but now we have to focus on the future. We've got to set an example for other businesses, especially the ones who think they don't stand a chance." Lisa smiled, the weight of the past few months lifting off her shoulders. "So, what's the plan? How do we turn this victory into something lasting?" Jerry took a deep breath, the pressure of the moment settling in. He knew that the next steps were crucial, but the answers weren't going to come easily. They had to find a way to not only rebuild but to innovate. The landscape of the automotive industry was changing, and the small dealerships were starting to have a voice. The balance of power had shifted, but there was still so much more to do. "I think it's time we start leading by example," Jerry said, his voice firm. "Let's take this opportunity to show the world what a dealership can really be. We'll focus on transparency, customer service, and community. And let's not forget, this all started because we cared about the people we serve, not just making a profit. We've got to stay true to that." Lisa's eyes lit up. A dealership that actually listens to its customers and treats them like family. That's what we've always done. But now we can show the world how it's done the right way. Jerry smiled. "Exactly. We'll use this momentum to create a new standard in the industry. And we'll make sure that every customer, every employee, every community member knows that they come first." Over the next several months, Heart and Soul Motors underwent a transformation. The dealership expanded its inventory, bringing in more cars to meet the growing demand. They introduced a new, customer-focused sales model, one that was completely transparent about pricing and financing, something that was rare in an industry often known for its opaque and sometimes deceptive practices. But it wasn't just about the cars. Jerry and Lisa knew that they needed to build a brand that reflected the values they had fought for, the values of integrity, fairness, and community. They launched new programs to give back to local schools, sponsor youth sports teams, and support charitable organizations. Jerry wanted to make sure that Heart and Soul Motors wasn't just a business. It was a force for good in the community. The public response was overwhelming. The dealership quickly became known not just for its cars, but for its commitment to ethical business practices. Customers flocked to Heart and Soul Motors not just because of the great deals, but because they believed in what the dealership stood for. As the months passed, Jerry found himself reflecting on how far they had come. The fight against Victory Motors had been grueling, but it had given him a new perspective on the kind of business he wanted to run. He had always dreamed of a place where people could come in and feel like they were part of something bigger than just a transaction. Now, with the victory behind them, that dream was becoming a reality. One evening, as Jerry sat in his office, looking out at the dealership lot, Lisa walked in, holding a piece of paper. "We've got some more good news," she said, a grin spreading across her face. Jerry raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "We just received an award from the National Small Business Association," Lisa said, handing him the paper. "They're recognizing Heart and Soul Motors as one of the top small businesses in the country for innovation and community service." Jerry laughed, feeling the weight of the past year lift off his shoulders. "I guess we really did make a difference." Lisa nodded. "And this is just the beginning. We've built something special here, Jerry, and now the world is starting to see it." As they stood there, looking at the dealership, Jerry realized that their journey wasn't just about fighting against an oppressive corporation. It was about creating something lasting and meaningful. Heart and Soul Motors wasn't just a dealership anymore. It was a symbol of hope for small businesses everywhere. A reminder that with enough heart, determination, and integrity, even the biggest challenges could be overcome. Jerry had never expected this level of attention. What had started as a simple desire to run an honest, customer-focused business had turned into a movement. The media, small business advocates, and even local governments were all taking notice of what Heart and Soul Motors had achieved. Jerry and Lisa had no choice but to adapt quickly, handling the increased visibility while maintaining their focus on their core values. As their reputation continued to grow, Jerry received an unexpected phone call one afternoon. It was from the National Small Business Alliance, inviting him to speak at their annual conference. They had been so impressed by the transformation of Heart and Soul Motors, from a dealership mired in legal battles to a company that championed transparency, ethics, and community, that they wanted Jerry to share his story. At first, Jerry hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something he had ever imagined himself doing. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was another opportunity to make an impact. He could speak for the small business owners who had been pushed around by corporations for too long. He could be a voice for those who didn't think they had a chance. With Lisa's encouragement, Jerry agreed. He knew that sharing their journey, especially the hardships, might inspire others to stand up for themselves in their own battles. The day of the conference arrived, and Jerry was more nervous than he had ever been before. The conference hall was filled with small business owners, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders from across the country. Everyone was buzzing with excitement as they awaited Jerry's keynote speech. Lisa stood beside him backstage, offering her usual reassuring smile. "You've got this," she said, her hand on his shoulder. "Just tell them your story. People will connect with that." When it was his turn to take the stage, Jerry took a deep breath. He stepped into the spotlight, the faces of hundreds of people staring back at him. For a moment, he felt a wave of panic. But as he looked out into the audience, he saw so many people who had been in his shoes. People who had faced struggles and setbacks. People who were looking for a way forward. And that was when Jerry realized that he wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He was speaking for every small business owner who had ever felt powerless. "I want to start by telling you about a simple car dealership," Jerry began. "A dealership that had dreams of making a difference in the world, but was told it couldn't compete with the big guys. That was Heart and Soul Motors. And when we first started, we had no idea just how much bigger the fight was going to be." Jerry went on to explain the entire journey. The initial struggles, the court battle against Victory Motors, the hardships they had endured, and the transformation they had gone through. He talked about how the community had rallied behind them and how they had rebuilt their reputation through hard work, transparency, and a commitment to treating their customers and employees like family. But it wasn't just about them. It was about everyone who had ever felt that small businesses were at a disadvantage. Every day, we're told that the only way to succeed is by playing the game the way the big corporations do, Jerry continued. But I've learned that you don't have to sacrifice your values to make it. You don't have to play dirty to win. Sometimes, all you need is the courage to stay true to what you believe in and the willingness to keep fighting, even when the odds are against you. Jerry's words were met with applause, but he didn't stop there. He talked about the ripple effect that their victory had created, how their story had inspired other small business owners to stand up and challenge the status quo, how people from all over the country had reached out to them, saying that they had finally found hope. "We're not just a dealership anymore," Jerry said, his voice growing stronger. "We're a symbol of what's possible. We're proof that you don't have to be big to be powerful. And I believe that if we keep pushing forward, if we keep supporting each other, we can change the way business is done in this country. We can make it a place where honesty, integrity, and community matter more than the bottom line." As Jerry finished his speech, the audience erupted in applause. He felt a sense of pride swelling within him, but more than that, he felt a deep connection to everyone in that room. These were the people who were making a difference every day, and he was honored to be part of that movement. Back in the days that followed the conference, Jerry couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. The message had been received, and now it was time to take it even further. Small businesses all over the country were beginning to rethink their approach. They were looking for ways to be more transparent, to create better relationships with their customers, and to build a sustainable future that didn't rely on corporate greed. As Heart and Soul Motors expanded further, Jerry and Lisa focused on developing partnerships with other businesses in the community. They worked with local schools, charities, and organizations to foster a sense of unity and shared purpose. This wasn't just about business. It was about creating a legacy of compassion and collaboration. The dealership launched new programs aimed at helping new entrepreneurs get their start in the business world. They provided mentorship, financial support, and business training to individuals who had been overlooked by traditional corporate structures. Jerry wanted to ensure that the spirit of what they had built didn't just live in their dealership. It would ripple out into the world. The results were astonishing. Other small businesses, inspired by Jerry's speech and actions, began adopting similar values and practices. It was no longer just about making a profit. It was about making a positive impact on the community and the world. The ripple effect had begun. One evening, as Jerry stood in the dealership, looking out over the lot filled with new and used cars, he thought about how far they had come. It hadn't been easy, but everything they had endured had been worth it. Jerry smiled to himself. Heart and Soul Motors had not only survived, it had thrived. And more importantly, it had sparked a movement that was changing the landscape of small businesses across the nation. The fight wasn't over. The journey wasn't finished. But Jerry was more certain than ever that he was exactly where he needed to be. He had fought for what was right, and now he was part of something much bigger than himself. And that was just the beginning. It had been a few years since the courtroom victory, and Heart and Soul Motors had become a model for what small businesses could achieve. Jerry and Lisa's dealership had grown in ways they had never imagined, becoming more than just a successful business. It was a symbol of resilience and ethical entrepreneurship. But with that success came new challenges. The public's perception of small businesses was shifting, and as more companies adopted the values Jerry and Lisa had championed, the question arose. How could they maintain the legacy they had built? How could they keep innovating, evolving, and staying ahead without losing sight of the very principles that had led to their success? Jerry often found himself reflecting on these questions, even as he continued to lead the dealership. It wasn't that they were in danger of losing their way. It was that the bar had been set so high, and the responsibility to keep raising it was a constant weight. One day, as Jerry and Lisa sat in their now bustling dealership office, they discussed the future. "You know, Jerry," Lisa began, her eyes scanning the latest figures on the sales report, "we've done more than we ever thought possible. But what's next for us? How do we keep this momentum going?" Jerry leaned back in his chair, the weight of the question heavy in his thoughts. He had always prided himself on his ability to adapt and change, but now, after everything they had achieved, the idea of what came next felt more important than ever. "You're right," Jerry replied, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "We've set the standard for transparency, community, and customer service, but we can't stop here. We need to think about the next step in our journey. And that step has to be about building a legacy." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "A legacy?" Jerry nodded. "Yes, a legacy that will outlast us. Something that continues to make an impact long after we're gone. Maybe it's time to expand even further, beyond just selling cars. We've built a brand, but it's not just about cars anymore. It's about making a difference in the world." Lisa sat forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Jerry smiled, his mind racing with possibilities. What if we took what we've built and turned it into a full-fledged movement? A network of small businesses that all operate under the same values we fought for: ethics, transparency, community involvement. Imagine creating a network where we could mentor and support other small businesses, helping them thrive in a world that often overlooks them. We could create a foundation to provide education, resources, and grants for entrepreneurs who want to start businesses that give back to their communities. Lisa's eyes widened, excitement bubbling up. That's incredible. You're talking about building a whole ecosystem of businesses that prioritize the things we believe in. Exactly, Jerry said, his voice filled with conviction. It's about empowering people, inspiring change, and leaving behind something that lasts. And we've already proven that it's possible. We've shown that small businesses can compete with the giants and win. Now, we need to show the world how to do it. Lisa smiled, a proud look crossing her face. I love it. Let's do it. And so, with that conversation, Jerry and Lisa began their next big venture, the Heart and Soul Network. It would be a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting and mentoring small businesses that wanted to create positive change in their communities. The idea was simple: provide resources, financial support, and business training to entrepreneurs who wanted to succeed without compromising their values. Over the next year, they worked tirelessly to establish the network. They reached out to other successful small business owners, brought in experts in business development, and partnered with organizations that shared their mission. They created mentorship programs, workshops, and grant opportunities for small businesses across the country. They even held annual events to bring together entrepreneurs who believed in the power of ethical business practices. The response was overwhelming. Entrepreneurs from all over the country, some just starting out and others looking for guidance, flocked to the Heart and Soul Network, eager to be part of something bigger than themselves. The network quickly grew, and the impact was undeniable. Jerry and Lisa had created something truly special. The ripple effect of their victory had turned into a tidal wave, inspiring thousands of small business owners to stand tall and fight for what was right. One evening, a few years after the launch of the Heart and Soul Network, Jerry and Lisa stood on the stage at the annual National Small Business Conference, where Jerry was being honored with an award for his efforts in supporting small businesses. As Jerry accepted the award, he couldn't help but think back to the beginning of his journey. From a car dealership just trying to survive to a leader in the movement for small business reform, the path had been long and filled with challenges. But it had also been the most rewarding journey of his life. I never set out to be an icon, Jerry said, looking out at the crowd. I just wanted to create something real, something that made a difference. But if this journey has taught me anything, it's that small businesses have the power to change the world. And together, we can continue to make that change. The room erupted in applause, and Jerry felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. He had done it, not just for himself, not just for Heart and Soul Motors, but for everyone who believed in the power of doing business the right way. Lisa stood beside him, beaming with pride, knowing that their work had only just begun. The legacy they had started was growing, and the future was bright for small businesses everywhere. As Jerry looked out into the crowd, he realized that the fight wasn't over. There was still work to be done, still obstacles to overcome, and still people who needed a voice. But now, more than ever, he knew that they were on the right path. The story of Heart and Soul Motors was no longer just about one dealership. It was about an entire movement. A movement that would continue to inspire change, lead with integrity, and prove that no dream was too big and no fight was too hard. Jerry smiled to himself as the applause continued, the echoes of hope and possibility ringing through the room. The journey had come full circle, but it was far from over. And as he stepped off the stage, surrounded by the people who had believed in him from the beginning, Jerry knew that the true legacy was just beginning to take shape. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. What does legacy mean to you? How do you think small businesses can continue to make an impact? Share your thoughts and join Jerry and Lisa as they continue to change the world, one small business at a time.